Okay, and then you have another one, something bigger, but it doesn't, there's no shipwrecks in it. That line over here was drawn.
There's a little bit of cover for you.
So,
Kids went to my favorite Chinese food.
go on, and here's the,
Without you.
Governor Walker.
Hello, everybody. Let's call to order the meeting of the Mequon Municipal Water Utility and have a roll call.
Commissioner Strelchuk,
Here.
Commissioner Bushy,
Here.
Commissioner Meyer,
Here.
Commissioner Worth,
Here.
Commissioner Garrell,
Here.
Commissioner Hawkins, Commissioner Schneider,
Here.
Commissioner Nervin,
Here.
Commissioner Abendroth.
Here. We have a quorum, and the first item is the approval of minutes from November 14th.
Move approval. Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. The next item is discussion and action on authorization of an intergovernmental agreement with Thiensville for the Hoff development.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That is approved. The next item is reallocation of capital funding.
Move approval.
Motion and a second to approve. Any questions or discussion? It's all pretty clear. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Move to
Motion
adjourn.
passes.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. I would like to thank the engineering staff for their fine work tonight.
Yeah. Thanks for your input.
We're going to take a 30-second break. As I've been requested. Technical people need a 30 seconds.
Oh.
Actually, we don't get anything into it for it. I don't know what it's for.
Yeah.
We want the television system to work.
What? Oh, that's what we have sewer. Oh, no, I know we got sewer.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to now call to order the meeting of the Sewer Utility District Commission, and let's have a roll call.
Commissioner Strelchuk,
Here.
Commissioner Bushy,
Here.
Commissioner Meyer,
Here.
Commissioner Worth,
Here.
Commissioner Garrell,
Here.
Commissioner Hawkins,
Here.
Commissioner Schneider,
Here.
Commissioner Nervin,
Here.
Commissioner Abendroth.
Here. We have a quorum, and the first item is meeting minutes of December 12th.
Move
Move
approval.
approval.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Resolutions, we have three. Resolution 3499, authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement with the Village of Thiensville for public sanitary sewer service at 12431 North Green Bay Road. I'm not going to read the tax parcel number. And an adjacent 7.5 acre parcel located immediately to the west.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution 3499 is adopted. Resolution 3498, a resolution amending Resolution 3478 to increase compensation for the negotiation and execution of easement agreements within the East Trunk Sewer Project area based on professionally certified appraisals.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution 3498 is adopted. Resolution 3500, authorizing publication of notice of intent to issue general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $20,340,000 in connection with the East Trunk Sewer Capacity Expansion Project.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted unanimously. Discussion item, East Trunk Sewer Summary Presentation. We don't get to vote on this, so.
The
action requested on this presentation, I should clarify that in the agenda, this is an overview and a summary of the history of the East Trunk Sewer and where we are now, looking at the next steps, and having an opportunity to address any questions as we go forward on the project. The East Trunk Sewer from Lift Station E was constructed back in 1967, and there was a second force main added and in the 80s, and then back in the last 30 years we had over 70 sanitary sewer overflows, which are violations of the Wisconsin permit discharge elimination system. So this East Trunk Sewer project is it's a corrective action, which stemmed from sanitary sewer system evaluation in 2009. Subsequent to that evaluation and report, a preliminary design report was established, and in 2017, the alignment coming from that design report was reviewed, and we are in final design of the project. We're expecting final plans this week as we prepare for advertisement of the contract, with the action tonight of authorizing the compensation based on certified appraisals. We'll be moving forward within 90 days. There's 7 easements that are yet required. 2 are in negotiation, and 6 have already been acquired. The permits we have in place include the Union Pacific Railroad, the DOT, the Ozaukee County Port Washington Road. Those permits are in place, and then the MMSD permit is pending revision. We are planning to go forward with the contract advertisement this February, and our outreach continues with property owners and businesses along the Port Washington Road corridor, along Dunges Bay Road, and in Catherine Kearney Park. We anticipate a bid opening in March, an April contract award, and in May to proceed with construction. That construction will begin with the mobilization by the contractor. With this schedule, the tentative schedule, we're looking at in summer working in Catherine Kearney Carpenter Park, where there will be a temporary parking lot closure, and then we'll be coordinating with the Parks Committee on that, and we'll look at reopening the park. The park will remain open for access. It is the parking lot that will be closed. One of the parking lots will be closed temporarily during the work. And then in the winter of 2018-2019, we're looking to cross Interstate 43 at Zedler to Port Washington Road, which is a project milestone. Then we'll turn the corner to go up Port Washington Road in 2019 to Dunges Bay. And in the fall of 2019, we're scheduled to complete the work in Stone Creek Drive and make our final connection with the diversion structure number 3 there. Let's see. So that's a summary of the work and the schedule going forward, and I'd like to open it up with any questions.
I had a question.
Alderman Gerald.
The first thing on your first slide, you said that we had 70 sewer backups over the last 30 years. Was that what it said?
Yeah. Sanitary sewer overflows from our system, yes.
Right, and No, there's years where that's not households, that's how many
Correct.
backups.
That's
Exactly.
that's our system. Correct.
Exactly. Then the second question is where you're ending with this, and this is probably more of a question of the future. But I have a lot of developers that go from Highland Road all the way to Pioneer Road along Port Washington that are just aching to get water and sewer over there. This isn't going to do that. I know that. This is just to solve the backups. But any hope you can give that group?
We need to be able to commit to MMSD that we can provide service to those. So as soon as we have these plans approved and hopefully the project well under construction, then we can pursue those conversations. Obviously, that takes some policy decisions by this body. That would require not only an expansion of the sewer service area, but a policy discussion about how that area would be served by water and sewer. So we don't intend to just complete this project and not continue that conversation. So as soon as we can assure MMSD that we can provide capacity, then we can come back to you with those policy discussions.
Alderman Nervin. Commissioner Nervin.
Getting back to the staff memo regarding the general obligation debt we just approved, thought we were looking for guidance on two options. We gonna talk about that here?
On the borrowing,
Is option one, option two, I see Ellers is here.
I will defer to someone.
Seems like we
Skip that.
skipped that part, and I don't want anyone to go away wanting more, as long as we're here.
Sure. So the staff memo showed two scenarios how we could finance the 20+ million of sewer improvements. One was basically front loading the borrowing with 18 million in year one and
Use the mic, Tom.
18 million in year one, and then the balance of that in year two. The thought being that as we go farther out in the future, interest rates are more of an unknown. And as the staff memo goes on to say, it would be a non-BQ borrowing, but that would preserve BQ debt capacity for the city for future borrowing, such as roads or infrastructure improvements that the city in general wants to do. The other option would be to borrow the money in below $10 million blocks over the next 3 years, and that would preserve BQ debt capacity, but would have the added risk of risk exposure in years 2 and 3. So we're all watching the financial news every night and wondering what's going on with the general economy and interest rates in general. It's just a risk component of financing this amount of money for that kind of future borrowings that I'm concerned about. So I recommended that we would look at the 2-year, the shorter borrowing window, but obviously a larger borrowing in year one. I'm anxious to hear the commission's feedback, though.
Remind us when the sewer wars debt is retired.
It actually expired in 2017.
Let's see,
We didn't
where are we
have a
now?
party.
We're in 28.
Convenient timing.
All right. Okay.
I think Mr. Watson has always done an outstanding job on his financing and refinancing and the like, and his analysis of what's going on with the economy is good. That he's forecasting ahead. I'll put my opinion in. I can't forecast interest rates, and although that's been my business for the last 38 years in that area. One thing is that when wage inflation, when I started in the business back in 1980, we had wage inflation, and we had a stagnant economy, and we had interest rates and long bonds at over 16%, and we had money market funds at 24%, and we had T-bill rates that were well up in the 18, 19, 20s. So if these rates are to go up and we can borrow more in the beginning and lock those rates in before they do rise, that's probably prudent. But we will see. You know, once again, I say I can't forecast interest rates, but I have some experience, and I have some experience with cycles. So, and it is a beautiful time to be borrowing still.
Alderman Worth.
Does anybody run models of how much what the cost would be of borrowing the entire amount in year one, and what kind of interest rate increase would justify that?
As far as the amount justifying it, it would not be a problem to borrow the entire amount in year one. The structure, we just changed the structure. Our structuring was to wrap it around and make it the same dollar amount that the utilities have been collecting for your prior capacity rates, that 1.7 million. So it probably, putting that extra 2 million into this year would probably just extend it out another year, a little bit more. So as far as the cost, it's just that last year maturity that might have a little higher interest rate. But what I can say is we have a fairly good handle on where interest rates are now. That spread between bank qualified and non-bank qualified is very minimal for the first 10 years. It starts ramping up a little bit after that, and we've built that into this model. So the cost of as Tom mentioned in his memo, there's a little bit more cost of putting it into 2 issues versus 3. If the rates go up 25 basis points, you negate that. So, we're guessing on where rates will be a year from now or 2 years from now, and the bigger guess is probably the 2 years. So I don't think you'd see a whole lot if you borrowed it all now. I guess the question would be, are you confident that you're going to be able to, that the project's going to cost as much as 20 million? Because you don't necessarily want to overborrow. So that's part of the reason we kept a small amount to be carried over into next year at the same time you do your road projects, in case the estimates are under the $20 million for project cost.
What does staff think about the dollar amounts? My fear is, and again, nobody can predict interest rates, but we've had an historically long period of low interest rates, and we have almost full employment and a lot of other factors that would, and the Fed indicating that they're likely to increase interest rates. I'd bet a lot of money that interest rates are going to be a lot higher than a quarter or a half a point higher a year from now or 2 years from now. And therefore, borrowing all the money up front would save us money in the long run, because interest rates really go up 2%. That might be worth it, but I don't know what the downside is of over borrowing, what the cost would be. Do we?
I guess.
And I've never seen projects come under budget, or they rarely do. They usually come over budget. But maybe in this one we've got a better handle on cost.
Well, I think as always, you have a project cost estimate and then, of course, a contingency. And so when we bid the initial phase, we'll at least know what the cost of that portion of the project is. And the idea is, as we move into the bidding process for phase 2, we can really narrow in more on what the cost would be. And depending on the timing, we could actually bid that project and know the exact dollar amount for that second phase ahead of the second borrowing.
But I'm talking about doing it all in one borrowing.
Understood.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that could mitigate our risk of I can't speak to the cost of over borrowing.
Right.
I'm willing to spend anything that you borrow on sanitary sewer projects.
I'm
So
not looking for you to spend everything, whatever we can, but I also don't want to put off a year or two, a year and find out that we have a giant interest rate increase. So what does it cost? What's the?
Well, I guess if you were to, we're only talking $2 million is the way we have split that second amount. So you could bring that $2 million in. The cost is not going to be, you probably save money in terms of interest, because we've factored in an increase for the second year borrowing and the interest cost. And as I just mentioned to Tom, if by chance you've overborrowed, any excess proceeds that you have, you could deposit in your debt service fund and use it to pay principal and interest on the borrowing. So, you know, it could go to use, or you could use it on other utility projects if you had other sewer utility projects that needed to be done, and you'd have the cash available to do that. So I guess that would be kind of the exposure the plan would still be to do some street projects perhaps next year. And so you might have a borrowing anyway, but as Tom said, then you've got capacity for other things if they come along as well. So it's not a downside to do that. We didn't prepare that in an analysis, but it still could be accomplished and make your annual payments equal. My guess is it would just add one more year of, it makes the whole structuring easier, but it would probably add one more year to the debt plan.
I just fear interest rates, so I don't know what others think. And what are you looking, is this a decision we make tonight, or is it, do you look at what our options are when you go to market, or what do you want here?
Well, I appreciate the feedback, because we're going to use that to structure the next scenario that we would use to do the planning. One of the things that staff struggles with is we haven't opened bids yet. We just have a project estimate. And so we don't want to significantly overborrow or underborrow for that matter either. So that's why I basically deferred some of the borrowing to year 2, because those numbers would firm up. But we could certainly borrow the entire amount now, and we'd have a known interest rate structure for the life of that borrowing. And if there was some under borrowing issue, we could always true that up in year 2 or year 3.
Probably year 2.
I mean, personally, I'd prefer to see that we have borrowed enough money to actually do this when interest rates are where they're at, because the Fed keeps talking about it. Now, they've been talking about it for a couple of years, and they've made minor adjustments, but I think they're going to go up significantly. We've been stealing from seniors' retirements for too long.
The next step after the action this evening is, once this resolution is been approved, we will prepare a final pre-sale document with, if you choose to do the full amount, we'll prepare that with that purpose. It can be distributed at your next meeting. I think Tom is looking at a timing of doing this borrowing, and the sale would be on your April 10th meeting. So you could see what that would look like, but that would be the document that we use to prepare the preliminary official
Make a
statement for
decision
sale.
tonight.
No.
Okay. Excellent.
So you can prepare a document that includes what Alderman Worth was asking for.
Yeah, we'll move forward kind of with that thinking, if that's acceptable. We'll prepare a pre-sale document, which is, we like to see in the structure we intend to take to sale, and that can be distributed at your next meeting. Wouldn't necessarily need any action. It'd be more of an FYI.
Informational.
Okay.
And could I ask one other question, not on the borrowing, or are we done with the borrowing? Go ahead, back to the presentation we were having a few minutes ago. The policy decisions we will start talking about a year from now or whatever on the expansion, none of those would impact the engineering or the work that you would do now on the, actually, maybe I should stop using the word expansion, on the continuing up Port Washington Road on the current capacity project.
Correct. We asked for permission ahead of this project to be sure that this project was designed with the capacity to address the overflow issues or the capacity issues, as well as the anticipated capacity for what we're mainly calling the East Growth area.
Okay, so we should be good. Thank you.
Okay. That's it? Thank you, staff. A well-done job.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Good evening, friends and neighbors. Welcome to the Common Council meeting for Tuesday, February 13th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Call the roll.
Alderman Strelchuk?
Here.
Alderman Bushy? Here. Alderman Meyer?
Here.
Alderman Worth?
Here.
Alderman Garrow?
Here.
Alderman Hawkins? Alderman Schneider?
Here.
Alderman Nurbin?
Here.
Mayor Abendroth?
Here. We have a quorum. First item, personal appearances and public comments. Citizens wishing to address the council on any item that is not on our agenda may do so at this time. Is there anyone who wishes to address the council on any item that is not on our agenda? Seeing none, we move on to public officials' reports. I have none. Do you have? City Administrator has none. Moving on to our consent agenda, which includes Common Council minutes of January, Economic Development Board minutes of November, Finance Personnel minutes of December, Joint Mequon-Thiensville Bike and Pedestrian Way Commission minutes of November and January, Mequon Festivals Committee minutes of November, Open Space Preservation Commission minutes of August, Park Board minutes of October, Planning Commission minutes of December, Public Safety Committee minutes of December, Public Welfare Committee minutes of December, and Special Welfare Committee minutes of December as well. Of January. Public Works Committee minutes of December, Tree Board minutes of August, and Resolution 3493 observing International Migratory Bird Day in 2018. Recommendation forthcoming from Public Welfare Committee.
Mr. Mayor, Public Welfare unanimously recommends adoption. I'd add two things. It's actually the title may be a little misleading because it's making us a tree city. It's not just for a bird city. It's not just for Migratory Bird Day. And also contrary to the memo, there is a $100 fiscal impact. Just not to make it clear.
And Resolution 3494 designating Mequon, Wisconsin as a bee city, USA.
We also approved this one, or recommend this unanimously.
Any cost to bees?
Nope.
No cost
Bees
to
are
bees.
bees are cheap.
Okay. I need a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
Move to approve?
Second.
Motion and second to approve. Call the roll.
Alderman Strelchuk?
Aye.
Alderman Bushy?
Yes.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
Alderman Worth?
Aye.
Alderman Garrow?
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins? Alderman Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin?
Aye.
8-0, and the consent agenda is adopted.
Your Honor, we have a number of people tonight wishing to speak about the Lake Michigan National Marine Sanctuary, and I'd like to move to suspend the rules so that we take up that resolution, 3491.
I'll second it.
Motion and a second to suspend the rules in order to take up Resolution 3491. Call the roll.
Alderman Bushy?
Yes.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
Alderman Worth?
Aye.
Alderman Garrow?
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins?
Aye.
Alderman Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin?
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk?
Aye. Mr. Contrary.
8-0, and the rules are suspended. We will now take up Resolution 3491, a resolution opposing the proposed designation of a Wisconsin Lake Michigan National Marine Sanctuary. This was recommended by the Public Welfare Committee in January. Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, members of the audience. In 2014, the state of Wisconsin nominated an 875 square mile area of western Lake Michigan from here in Mequon up to Two Rivers as a national marine sanctuary. As noted in this evening's packet, this nomination was endorsed by several organizations, individuals, a listing of which, as I mentioned, is included in the packet. These included elected officials, businesses, various institutions, user groups, educational institutions, etc. In 2015, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA, reviewed the state's nomination and approved it. And in late 2015, NOAA then commenced a process to actually consider formal designation of the marine sanctuary. Initially, the organizing efforts behind this nomination were led by a number of Mequon's neighbors to the north, including the towns of Port Washington, Sheboygan, Manitowoc, and Two Rivers. And though the process was underway starting back in 2014, Mequon was approached by NOAA in 2016 and invited to join a community working group to monitor the process and help promote community awareness of this initiative. In 2017, a 90-day public comment period was conducted, and as I understand it, nearly 500 comments and documents were received both in support and in opposition to the proposed sanctuary. In accordance with that 90-day comment period, a resolution was brought forward to the city's Public Welfare Committee in March of last year to support the proposed sanctuary. At the time, the committee voted by a vote of 2-0 to table the resolution, citing the city's historical precedent for not taking a position on matters outside of the city's jurisdiction or responsibility. Last month, Alderman Garrell and Bushy introduced a resolution at the Public Welfare Committee opposing the National Marine Sanctuary, which is currently under consideration for designation by NOAA. And on January 23rd, a couple weeks back, the committee voted by a margin of 2-0 to recommend consideration of the resolution opposing the National Marine Sanctuary by the full Common Council at this evening's meeting. I would just like to mention, before I conclude my remarks introducing the item, that Russ Green, the regional coordinator for NOAA's Office of Marine Sanctuaries, who was in attendance at the Public Welfare Committee meeting last month and has been here at the Common Council meeting previously, and John Broyhan, a state archaeologist with the Wisconsin Historical Society, are here should any members of the Common Council have questions regarding the nomination or the designation process that has occurred here to date. So,
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. We have a number of people who have registered to speak on this issue. I will read your name, and if you if you register to speak, please come up to the podium. John Elmendorf on Lakeshore Drive supports the resolution but does not wish to speak. Marco Musich of Wasaki Road supports the resolution but does not wish to speak. Liz Sellers of Lakeview Place supports the resolution, does not wish to speak. Paul Sheldon on Sheridan Drive supports the resolution, does not wish to speak. Judith Curvin and Dale Cohn support the resolution and do not wish to speak. Patricia Foy, Sheridan Drive, supports the resolution, does not wish to speak. Martha Burchern, Sheridan Drive, supports the resolution, does not wish to speak. Fred Foy of Sheridan Drive supports the resolution and does not wish to speak. William Buchan of Sheridan Drive supports the resolution and does not wish to speak. Martin Hennekins of Lakeshore Drive supports the resolution and does wish to speak. Mr. Hennekins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. I used to get up every day and walk the beach with my dog. I can't do that anymore. I own property on Lake Drive, and this NOAA project could affect me. Honestly, I wish it had happened years earlier. I wish the scientific review and government oversight could have been there to stop the real destroyers of my bluff. If the aldermen now and the Common Council now would like enough time to find out, review, and explain this situation, great, I support that. But please do not stop and be against science and government. Not one project by a homeowner, an individual homeowner, would be stopped by this. But a huge project disrupting the littoral drift would be halted by it, and would be halted by an agency big enough to not be intimidated by the local bully. I ask the aldermen and mayor as they review this to find out if, one, is there any possible way that with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the ongoing destruction of our bluffs can be reversed? Or, if not that, if we as homeowners would actually band together in a large group together, could we do a project that would reclaim the littoral drift that once fed our beaches, preserved our bluff, and can NOAA help us on this, the NOAA NOAA? Remember, it was Concordia being able to dismiss science, being able to coerce local and state officials into ignoring all existing laws that caused our bluffs to be destroyed. It was not preserving shipwrecks that caused the problem. It was not science, and it was not strong government that hurt us. It was those who dismiss the oversight and create their own untruths that leave us right now without beaches and without the protection, and our bluffs are crumbling. So yes, I do support this resolution. I ask you to take the time and find out what is it that can be done to help us who are suffering, those who are trying to say this big bad government entity is going to come in and destroy our bluffs. That doesn't scare me. They're not. They're not. Let's find out how they can work with us, how we can get the littoral drift restored and get our beaches and bluffs taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hennekins.
Point of order, Your Honor. Yeah. He's actually opposed to the resolution. I'm a little concerned that we're reading things, people are in favor or opposed, and maybe it's not clear from the way these are checked off. So is there any way to get a determination whether people are in favor of the resolution or opposed to the resolution that's before us? Because he opposes the resolution.
He supports the resolution.
I do support that you resolve now to say no to this project, but simply because it's come upon us in a way that, so what does this do to us? I would love it if we had NOAA involved in our bluffs. I would love it if we had a large government entity that did some real oversight, because that's what has failed in the past. The lack of any government oversight or any scientific knowledge is what has caused the problem.
But we're saying we don't want NOAA, I mean, the resolution is to keep NOAA out. That's
right, and my understanding is because right now most homeowners don't understand how this would affect them. I would like it if the city would partner with NOAA, would look to be involved and present this to us as homeowners on the bluff. Hey, this is what's happening. Preserving shipwrecks isn't going to ruin my bluff. Having to have somebody say, when you drop a couple rocks in a couple big boulders in to preserve your bluff, let's make sure this isn't going to land on a ship. I mean, it's not. It's irrelevant. That one more person has to look at it. Will that be one more step for me? Probably. Is that a big deal? No. But would someone actually who's concerned with the littoral drift bring science and the force of government in, be a helpful aid to me as a homeowner? Yes, I would love it. I would love it because my bluff is destroyed and my beach is missing because of a failure of government to listen to science. I hope that helps.
I understand your situation.
Thank you, sir.
But that's different. Thank you, Martin. The resolution opposes the marine sanctuary, so people are somewhat confused when they check support or oppose, but they do support Resolution 3491, and I think that's pretty clear.
Okay.
That everybody does, and that's why they're here. Julie Kether, Ville du Parc Drive, supports the resolution and maybe wants to speak. No? Okay. Steve Bursell, Sheridan Drive, supports the sanctuary and wishes to speak. That's what it says. I don't know if I got that right or wrong.
Thank you, Council. To be clear, I support the opposition of the
Okay.
formation of a sanctuary. I know the resolution is a little bit unclear, but I think most of the people here behind me tonight are probably reading it the same way I am, that they oppose the formation of NOAA and the sanctuary. I'll keep this real brief. I too am an owner on the bluff, and while I don't think this really has much to do about stability of bluff or any of those other issues and higher water levels, I'm opposed to it for a couple of different reasons. Mainly, and I've been involved for about the last year now, the idea that NOAA wants to create a boundary that goes up to the ordinary high water mark, and this is probably getting somewhat into the weeds, but I think a very important point. They in fact have insisted on it and on a couple of different drafts of this. I think it takes away land and property from the owners. I think a real simple solution would be, this is to protect shipwrecks and things underneath the sea. They could easily go to the boundary of the water, but in fact they insist on going further than that. So if we have low tide and low water levels, they're coming up to the ordinary high water mark, which at some point can be at the base of the bluff. So they in fact are taking the water and then strips of land beyond that. So that is the point that I have a real problem with here. And other than that, just kind of the overarching, I don't buy a lot of the arguments that this is going to bring in tourism and higher protections. I think those are all in place with the DNR and the protections that we have in Lake Michigan. I agree with Alderman Worth to a point that to have our nose into this business may be a little out of place, but I think we do have to make a stand here because it affects a lot of homeowners in Mequon, a significant portion of Mequon, and again, I support the resolution opposing the formation of the sanctuary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bursell. Elvira Denk, Lakeshore Drive, supports the resolution and does not wish to speak. Beth Furrer, Sheridan Drive, supports the resolution and does not wish to speak. Peter Denk supports the resolution and does not wish to speak. Jane Hamilton supports the resolution and does wish to speak. Jane Hamilton.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Jane Hamilton, and I reside in Oostburg, Wisconsin. Today, I stand firmly with all of those opposed to the federal taking of any portion of Lake Michigan and its shores. Tonight, I am reading the comments of Judith Perlman. I believe you have information from Judith in your packets. She resides at 1241 Lakeshore Drive, Cleveland, Wisconsin. I'll begin Judith's commentary. I sincerely regret that I cannot be here in person, but I am out of state on a long-planned vacation. I have lived in Cleveland on the lake for 23 years. I am an honors graduate of the first class of women at Princeton University and graduated with high honors from the University of Illinois College of Law at Urbana. I began my career working for the federal government in Washington, D.C., followed by an international practice in finance and acquisitions in Chicago. I'm also the author of a book on conservation activism. I have spent the better part of the last 11 months studying the sanctuary. We are looking at a huge, irrevocable decision, giving away control of Lake Michigan. And nobody had studied what we are giving up and what we are getting. And nobody had tested NOAA's statements for accuracy. So a group of us set forth to do that. One person spent 4 days in Alpena, Michigan at NOAA's Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary to observe and interview residents, business people, and NOAA staff. I read laws, regulations, economic studies, and financial statements, lawsuits against NOAA, and news reports about other sanctuaries. Others prepared timelines, read the public's sanctuary comments, Federal Register sections relating to the sanctuary, and more. My comments are based on our team's composite work of almost 1 year. I am not an active member of the bar, and I do not hold myself out as a lawyer. I am not making any legal opinions in these comments. 1. I understand that Mequon's riparian owners have a critical situation concerning bluff erosion. The sanctuary could be a disaster for them. Placements of rock will require special use permits. There are no standards in the regulations for granting or denial of those permits and no time periods for how long the permit process will take. There is no indication of what NOAA may require or if they will even allow it. Mequon already has a process that is working well. Why take the risk? 2, the sanctuary adds an entire new layer of federal bureaucracy on top of decisions relating to the lake and shoreline. These are already heavily regulated by state and federal laws. In addition to the special use permits mentioned above, NOAA will require certifications for persons and municipalities to be allowed to continue doing anything that is in violation of sanctuary rules, some as simple as municipal fireworks. And there is no guarantee that the certification will be granted or under what conditions. The sanctuary comes with broad and vague laws and regulations. I have read them, and these will be interpreted by NOAA. 3, these broad and vague laws and regulations limit private riparian rights significantly, even though the riparian title does not change. These laws also limit what municipalities can do on their shores up to the ordinary high water mark. The regulations are not about shipwrecks. They are all about sanctuary resources, which are so broadly defined as to include almost any artifact or object, including rocks, beach glass, metal, and driftwood. Possession of these resources in other sanctuaries has been subject to 6-figure fines. Sorry about that. Didn't need that, sorry. 4, the people who will be enforcing these laws have no accountability to the voters of Wisconsin. Federal bureaucrats are not elected. Changes in regulations are made pursuant to the Administrative Procedures Act. It is the hardest standard of law to overturn a decision made pursuant to this act. NOAA's talk about advisory councils and partnering is blather. Advisory councils are advisory. They have no power. NOAA retains all legal power. The same is true with her talking about partnering. NOAA is in charge. To the extent that they want partners, NOAA does want resources, such as unfunded mandates. 5, the sanctuary designation is historic and irrevocable. Once designated, there is no process for Wisconsin to get out. People are notoriously bad at predicting or guessing what will be good forever. We already know that the freshwater is the most precious commodity in the 21st century. Some people think fresh water is NOAA's endgame. Do we want to give over control and the future use of our fresh water to the federal government? 6, despite NOAA's PR campaign, the sanctuary has little to do with preserving shipwrecks. The proposed regulations are so broad as to give NOAA almost unlimited reach onto private and public property up to the ordinary high water mark, on the lake bottom and water. Even if Mr. Green, in good faith, tells us how he plans to enforce or not enforce the laws and regulations, they are on the books. He could be replaced tomorrow by a different administration with a different enforcement philosophy. 7, I'm almost done. NOAA never said from what are they protecting the shipwrecks. In the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement, NOAA said one of their first tasks would be to figure that out. Wouldn't you think they'd answer that before grabbing 1,200 square miles of Wisconsin territory, not after? NOAA has stated that they are looking to Wisconsin for enforcement, as NOAA has no fleet. We don't need to pay for a federal sanctuary and then pay again for the protection NOAA has offered. It's an empty promise. 8, the draft management plan has no budget. It is open-ended and irresponsible. There are no committed federal funds for the sanctuary to date. Funds, your taxes, are subject to allocation from the Department of Commerce in Washington. We could hand control of Lake Michigan to NOAA, and they would have no budget to fulfill any of their purported benefits. 9, finally, NOAA sold the sanctuary based on protecting shipwrecks, educating children and the public, and bringing tourism. First of all, the shipwrecks are already protected. Neither NOAA nor the Coast Guard has a budget or a fleet, well, the Coast Guard does, for additional protection to look to Wisconsin's resources and budget to finance that. Second, the Wisconsin Historical Society has a 30-year model and enviable educational programs regarding Wisconsin maritime history and shipwrecks. NOAA could supplement that with a grant if it wants more education. 3, as far as tourism, NOAA said the sanctuary would bring in tourism, but not so much that any additional infrastructure investment would be required. NOAA provided no substantiation for this claim, which is virtually impossible on its face. Tourism brings costs in infrastructure, public safety, maintenance, etc. Incidentally, at the sanctuary in Alpena, 12 years after its inception, NOAA itself commissioned an economic study because the economic tourism results were so disappointing. So remember, the NOAA sanctuary is redundant. Everything it wants to do is already being done. And NOAA can do all of the things they want to do without taking jurisdiction of the lake in a sanctuary. NOAA expects that we are lazy and won't take the time to read all the things they've printed about the sanctuary. This particular group has, and I think from what I have read to you tonight, you understand that this is much deeper, a much deeper message than you may have gotten previously. NOAA feels that we wouldn't have read the financial statements and would simply submit their templated letters in support of it. Sorry. Have no illusions about what is going on. NOAA is working very hard to sell you on the idea that you are better off turning over Lake Michigan to them. Please use great care this evening in making an informed decision. Thank you so much for your time. That was all from Judith.
Well done.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Don Edwards of Sheridan Drive supports NOAA and wishes to speak.
I support the resolution that takes away NOAA. So there's no question about that. I concur with everything that was just said because that was well put. So I'm going to take it probably a little bit more from a micro standpoint. I'm a property owner on Lake Michigan. I live in North Prairie Chasm Association. In an area that I live in for the last 125 years, we have monitored the beach, checked things out, and always had somebody that had beach security. There was a time when it was gated. There was a time when there was a fellow with a shotgun that was in the front that was actually trying to protect the area. We don't do that now. The other thing is that when it comes to the area that we live in, although there are 16 houses that are on lake property, there are actually 63 houses in North Prairie Chasm. All 63 houses have access to the beach to walk it. But I would like to take another step and go into the micro portion of this, because a lot of times we neglect what happens once somebody like NOAA comes in. The beach is an area that causes some degree of difficulty. There was a time just a few years back that the North Prairie Chasm Association met, and they asked me, as an example, this was a few years ago, not that many years ago, to be the beach security person. Now, I'm hoping that it wasn't because of my personality, but I'm not sure. But I did take on the responsibility. But I want you to know what took place there. When you went down to the beach, and this is a small area, there was a drug scene down there. It was heavy-duty drugs. There was alcohol. There was bottles. There were things that were thrown down. The kids would come down there. They would throw the bottles against the rocks, and people were afraid to go down to the beach. And there's a good reason for it, because it's like 90 to 100 feet up and down, going down to the beach. So what would happen is you have an access way to the south, you have an access way to the north. and people would come down from all areas. I even had one group that came down from a Eastern college, Ivy League college. It was down there. And what they do is they'll bring cases of beer, bottled beer, smashed beer. Even my dog walking down that beach area took a hit and severed an artery. We had a 5-year-old kid that found a syringe down there. There were drugs down there. There were gangs down there. We had people coming in at 10 o'clock at night and lighting fires. Some of these fires were pretty severe. We had one group that came down there and were dousing some logs right next to large spruce trees in a dry time. It could have taken the whole bluff out. We also had some occult versions down there that were doing different kinds of things that they ought not to do. Now, the DNR didn't help any of this. NOAA didn't do anything with this. I will say the Mequon police helped, and they were very good. But I'll tell you what they had to do. The only time they would come is when we called them. And they would take the south path, somebody be there, somebody be on the north path, somebody would be on the Oak Earth property. And then they would try to take these kids, and these kids were smart, and adults were smart. What they would do is send somebody up, put them in the two edges, and then when the police came down, just shout, holler, and then the kids or adults would scatter. It was a mess. We finally got it cleaned up. We in the neighborhood have rules on how to conduct yourself down there. There's an area for campfires. We monitor it. We want our residents that are there to have a safe environment going down there. And if you're looking at something like 1,200 miles, I have no idea how in the world they're going to protect this and what this is going to end up being. And I don't think, and I do a lot of inner-city work, a lot of inner-city voluntary work and things like that. I can tell you the drug scene is increasing. You know it's increasing. And when you got 90-foot bluffs, you can have all kinds of things going down there. We've had things where they're male and female doing their thing down there while we have kids down there. I mean, it was a mess. And so I just say that consider not only the legal aspects of this and the riparian rights, because we have riparian rights that are being taken away, but also consider the impact that all the stretch is going to have on the communities. It is going to be severe. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. John Fehrenbach, Sheridan Drive, supports the resolution, does not wish to speak. Kimberly Steinbrenner, Vintage Drive, supports the resolution and wishes to speak.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. I'm here to read a prepared statement on behalf of Paul and Terry Donola, who are unable to attend this evening. They're on Shorecliff Lane. But before I do, it's come to my attention that one or more individuals whose names were called have changed their mind and would like to speak. I don't know if that's allowed, but I was asked to bring that to your attention.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and read the prepared statement. Kim, it was nice to meet you yesterday. Thank you for bringing this issue to our attention. I'm curious why this issue hasn't been escalated inside our community. Regardless, I share the view there's a significant historical precedent supporting our sovereignty and see absolutely no reason to change the governance structure that has been in place for over a century. As I understand it, the federal role in the Great Lakes is clearly limited to interstate commerce and treaty powers. Interstate commerce focuses on facilitating navigation on the lakes. Treaty powers are to address the fact that both the U.S. and Canada share the lakes. The Boundary Water Treaty and the subsequent Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement address the international aspects of commerce and navigation and water pollution in the lakes. It appears to me the existing federal role, combined with our local sovereign governance, including the DNR, is an established working model. Adding an additional federal overlay not only violates our existing sovereignty, but adds another wasteful layer of administration and cost. We will be traveling and miss the upcoming hearings on the issue in Mequon. Please share our views on this issue as you see fit, and will certainly participate in any subsequent hearings or open house discussions on this issue. We are also concerned about the mission creep. If NOAA succeeds with the sanctuary, could there be some justification to move beyond the high-level watermark? Could they potentially use eminent domain to actually take our bluff and lands above the high watermark? All of our environment is connected between the DNR and the city. We already have rules to help protect our bluffs and waterfront. The federal government, through law and treaties, ensure commerce and pollution control in the lakes. It sounds like the NOAA is looking for a solution to a problem that does not exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Steinbrenner. Sharon Quinn, Lakeshore Drive, supports the resolution and does not wish to speak. Bob Hemke supports the resolution and does not wish to speak. Is there anyone else who would now like to speak? Come up and introduce yourself, sir.
Hello, my name is Marco Musich. Thank you very much for letting me change my mind so that I can speak. I'd like to share with you 33 years of experience, but I'd like to boil it down so that not all of us are bored to tears. Your time is extremely important. But I just bought a home in Woosaki, so I speak as a resident. However, for the last 33 years, we've also been, or I have also been, owners of homes and 3 subdivisions that we actually created, actually all in the town of Grafton. Our first one was about 25 years ago, where 20 years ago it was a little 4-home subdivision. The next one was actually a place called the Family Farm, about 4 minutes down the road. That's a 50-acre subdivision. And then recently, about a year ago, it took 14 months to negotiate and then start with the builder creating a 13-home subdivision. The reason I mention these concrete examples is not to examine, and I am in support of the resolution opposing, no, I'm sorry that I didn't clarify that initially. I'm not going to examine what they're doing within the water boundaries, but this came to my attention about 9 months ago, and the very first point that immediately hit me was the definition of the delineation of their point of responsibility, which is the high water mark. Now, whenever you build anything in Ozaki County, you first start to greet and understand your local building boards, the engineers, the DNR a little bit, but much more importantly, the shoreline zoning. And about 25 years ago when I started this process, I'm like, you know, you start to wonder, well, are the people on the other side of the counter going to be working for me? You get a little defensive. But after a couple of years, you start to understand that the vast majority of people, I don't care if it's state or county or local municipality, they want to do a good job. They actually want to see you succeed, and they want to help you. That is something that is, by 99% of the time, that is exactly what will reach you. It's already started to reach me in Mequon when I approached the building people about additions and things like that over on Woosaki Road. The point is, I started to work with shoreline zoning and embrace their abilities, their specificity, their thoroughness, the different caricatures and different qualities of each and every individual staff member. And that kind of floods you. It simply permeates the job. They do a thorough job. So as far as anyone examining or restricting any kind of shoreland line, I would suggest that the state of Wisconsin and the county especially already has its defenses in place, and that is your local municipalities' abilities and talents, the engineers that both sides have to hire, and then the shoreline zoning, and to some respect, the DNR if they have to be pulled in. The layers of special attention are already in place. I would be very, very concerned not only about another federal restrictive body coming into place, which is actually kind of a heavy hammer, in my opinion, over any of the other aforementioned bodies. I would wonder why they really need that the area of responsibility that allows them that space between the high water mark, which is a quite distinctive point on land, and the edge of the body of water. So I hope I've made it clear that, in my opinion at least, given my 30 years' experience in working with the bodies in the county here and in the state. We already have all of those safeties in place as far as how our bodies of water interact with the land and how we owners are supposed to act for the common good. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the council? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, ladies, gentlemen. My name is Doug Hamilton. I lived in Mequon from 1995 to 2015. I moved up to Sheboygan County and live up there now, and have been involved with the NOAA project. I support your resolution opposing the sanctuary. I am opposed to it. Ostensibly, the sanctuary is to protect shipwrecks, which are already being protected and cataloged by the Wisconsin Historical Society, and they're protected by state and federal laws. But what I want to read to you is the definition of a sanctuary resource that is in the draft environmental impact statement and draft management plan that was published in December of 2016, a little over a year ago. A sanctuary resource includes all prehistoric, historic, archaeological, and cultural sites and artifacts within the sanctuary boundary, including but not limited to all shipwrecks and related components. Prohibited activities or prohibited or otherwise regulated activities include moving, removing, recovering, altering, destroying, possessing or otherwise injuring or attempting to move, remove, recover, alter, destroy, possess, or otherwise injure a sanctuary resource. That has expanded way beyond protecting shipwrecks. That could apply to any prehistoric civilization that might be found along the beach. As a matter of fact, in the proposal from December of 2014, NOAA states, finally, little to no beach survey or submerged survey work focused on identifying early prehistoric or contact sites. None of that has been completed. Their interest extends way beyond shipwrecks. On another point, what was not included in your packet was a letter that was sent by Governor Walker to acting NOAA Administrator Benjamin Friedman. Governor Walker raised 14 questions regarding state sovereignty, sanctuary regulations, and protections for the state of Wisconsin and its lands. In summary, our country is facing a $20 trillion deficit. To me, the sanctuary is a duplicitous waste of taxpayer money. If they're going to spend that money, I'd rather see it go to funding the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is cleaning up identified toxic sites and restoring natural habitats. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Liz Sellers, and I live on Lakeview Place, and I've written to most of you. My concern is that the language in the letter that he referenced to Governor Walker, NOAA states that they intend to keep our homeowners' rights intact. But the word intend to me is not much of an assurance that my rights will remain intact. And I know that we all love the beach, but that to me is not the issue. It's saving our homes. And if the DNR is influenced by NOAA to put further restrictions on homeowners and disallowing putting rocks at the bottom, our homes are at risk. My house has to have rocks. And if someone says it can't have it, I'm going to lose my house. And so for me, that's a much bigger issue than being able to walk the beach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Sellers. As the city administrator said, there's a representative of NOAA here tonight, Mr. Green, and I'm just going to give him the opportunity if he wants to come up and address the audience, address the council on this issue.
Don't have anything prepared. I was trying to jot things down as folks were coming up here. And, you know, it seemed like a couple of key points were made, and they sort of fall into two camps. There's the landowner concerns, which completely and fully appreciate, and the specific concerns in Mequon, and then sort of the philosophical concerns about the sanctuary. Should we protect shipwrecks and that sort of thing? So, you know, I'll hit a few things and then just be available to answer your questions. I think two folks had mentioned that Mequon has a system that's working with the DNR and the permitting to save your bluffs. I couldn't agree more, and the sanctuary does not seek to add another layer of regulation to that or anyway be part of that situation. So in our proposal, it's pretty clear, I think, although maybe not, because the public process is still ongoing, and I'm hearing some concerns here that I should say we've also heard in the open public comment period. So these will be addressed in writing if we publish this and if a sanctuary is designated. And that is, it doesn't change state ownership of these bottomlands. And that's where we derive the language that says, you know, we won't change riparian rights because we're not changing, we're not creating federal land. It is still owned by the state, as are all the other resources in the lake. Those two are owned by the state. We don't have any authority to regulate those either. The couple things we do regulate are sanctuary resources, and that definition was shared with you, and it's pretty much aligns with the state's definition of cultural resources and the things they protect in that aspect of the lake. So when we say our regulations and our prohibitions are pretty narrowly focused, that's what we mean. That's a small slice of Lake Huron. In terms of what we can prohibit and what we can do, it really is relegated to that realm. So, and as Mr. Hamilton pointed out, altering, destroying, injuring shipwreck sites or sanctuary resources, that's it. In terms of permitting, which may be a little bit more appropriate for this venue and the resolution that you guys have, you know, we can only permit things that would break a sanctuary prohibition. So that's kind of a convoluted way to look at it. But essentially, if you wanted to destroy or alter a sanctuary shipwreck site, that's where permitting would come into play. We have an additional regulation which is over and above what the state has at the moment, and that's a prohibition on anchoring into shipwrecks. Again, not relevant for this discussion, but again, that would be an area where we would say, well, sure, if you want to anchor into a shipwreck, we'd like you to get a permit. I would also mention that this is an ongoing process, and we are, I don't know, 3/4 of the way through. And since the public comment period or scoping period that Mr. Jones referenced in 2015, we worked side by side with the state of Wisconsin, including the Wisconsin DNR, Wisconsin Coastal Management, folks that I'm sure you're very familiar with the work that you're doing on the bluffs, and they have not found an issue here. I think there's an email from the DNR in your packet that mentions fishing specifically and the ability for riparians to put in docks and piers, and those are specific examples, I think, of that speak to the larger point, which is we don't seek to regulate any of that stuff. We truly are narrowly defined, and our prohibitions are pretty narrow. I hear the word control a lot about the sanctuary, that NOAA would take control. Yes, sir.
You don't seek to prohibit. Would you be allowed to prohibit under your proposal? That's, I guess, the question of the landowners here.
Sure.
Would it be giving you legislation to allow you to prohibit that if you chose, or a governing body chose to in the future? If your answer is yes, every single person in this room's point is very, 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 very valid.
Yep, and it's a great question, so it'll take a bit to explain. The National Marine Sanctuary Act is a federal legislation that allows each one of these sanctuaries to regulate and do what it does. And they're all different, of course. They all protect some different kind of resource. So there's a lot of language in there that I think creates that concern that NOAA could regulate something beyond cultural resources. Each sanctuary has terms of designation, the specific resources it'll manage and the regulations that go with that. Sort of like the charter for that sanctuary. To change that would require a process that's identical to the one we're going through right now with public comment and with state sign-off. I mean, at the end of the day, the state of Wisconsin, the governor has the final review and is able to accept all or parts of this designation or not. So for this designation, it's narrow. To change it would include a pretty high bar, state buy-in, and a public process exactly like the one we're going through right now.
What does it include? Is it just the sanctuary in terms of the shipwrecks? Or could it allow for prohibition of protecting the shoreline and some of those other things based on, you know, in your description, unknown sites?
Right.
You know, the unknown is, well, now you've got the entire basin of Lake Michigan that you can now monitor and not allow, and these residents, if they need to put some rocks out to preserve their shoreline, my experience here, if there's not a call out disallowing your legislation on that, that's something that could be changed in the future by somebody else, unless if you had the rights or the broad
Right.
rights.
We cannot do that at present in the terms of these designation. Yep.
Okay. Fishing?
It's the same. It was not regulated under the terms of this designation. That's not. Pardon?
Fishing is not at all. You
Fishing,
can't
recreational
change that in the
fishing,
future.
charter fishing. Yep, they're not part of these regulations. Yep. Just one other point I'd like to make. In 18 years of the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, whose boundaries are defined similar to this, they define the ordinary high water mark a little bit differently. It's not the mark on the shoreline, but rather an elevation. But in principle, it's the same. Riparians. In fact, I own front property on Lake Huron in the sanctuary, so I understand the riparian rights there. And you know, in 18 years, we saw in the late 90s concerns very similar to these, and happy to say that in 18 years we have not had a conflict with landowners with some of these issues. So we have many on our Sanctuary Advisory Council as well. And then finally, would invite you to contact the Alpena City Council if you have specific questions about the way that sanctuary works. I know there's a lot that's been mentioned here tonight. I'm happy to, again, answer more questions or address it in some other format.
Mr. Green, are you familiar with the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program?
Yes.
It's a joint effort with UWM, right, and NOAA's involved in that.
Right,
It's
the
a
funding
totally
comes
separate
from NOAA.
program.
Pardon?
It's a totally separate program from the Marine Sanctuary thing.
Yep.
But as I understand it, they're studying the lakeshore and the bluffs and looking for solutions to problems that occur along there. Is that correct? Or more or less correct?
It's a good question. I think so. I believe so. It's a different, separate program from the
Somebody
sanctuary.
brought that up before, and I think that's a different program.
It is.
That can help homeowners address their bluff problems.
Mm-hmm.
And NOAA's a partner.
NOAA, yeah, that funding comes from NOAA at the federal level to the state Wisconsin Coastal Management Program. We could be a partner. That'd be fantastic. They are the lead agency on the designation from the state side, so folks like Mike Freeze and others who you may know, yeah, I mean, if there's a positive nexus between the sanctuary and Wisconsin Coastal Management that helps this problem, yeah, absolutely. If that's your question, it could help. But they
I
are
just
not
wanted to raise
tied
that as
together.
that's another issue that's out there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Council members. Alderman Garrell.
I have a presentation I put together for the council members. That's why I came up with this. I did my research, read everything I could possibly read, and I found some interesting facts that I think we should all be aware of. Just took some pieces together, went back and went over the history of this. And I'll call them by pages. I didn't number the pages, but I'll say page 1 and as I walk through this. We got a copy of all the different people who signed up back in 2014 that said this was such a great idea. Get me in, get me in, get me in. I'd like to be a part of this proposed new sanctuary and part of the nomination process. No details came with that marketing presentation. I could find no details on that marketing presentation. But if I would have looked at it, I said, wow, that's a great idea. They're going to come in here and they're going to protect shipwrecks. So you received nominations from politicians and communities and recreational stakeholders. To our north, even Governor Walker. Oh yeah, this looks really good, but show us some more. Show us exactly what it is. So it's interesting at that time that everybody put their nomination papers in. If you look at page 1 on the little handout that I gave you, it says in December of 2014, said it received broad support from local communities, state, federal elected officials, from tourism. If I would have saw a real good marketing presentation, I probably would have said, yeah, let's do that. If approved, the sanctuary would cover an area from Two Rivers to Port Washington with a focus on archaeological shipwrecks. From Two Rivers to Port Washington. Then it goes on to say, will not impact the ability of riparian owner to utilize their shoreline, including placement of piers or docks. It doesn't say revetments at all in that statement. After, if you look at the next page, page 2, location description, 875 square miles proposed in Wisconsin Sanctuary. The southern boundary is located 27 miles north of Milwaukee and 115 miles north of Chicago. You look at the next page. Port Washington, population 11,365, is the southernmost community in the proposed sanctuary boundary. Skip back to the page before the map. See the map of the proposed boundary that protects all the shipwrecks on page 2? Notice it doesn't go to Mequon. This sanctuary that these people signed off on never encompassed Mequon anywhere along the way. They all signed off on it. Even in Governor Walker's letter, he says the proposed sanctuary contains an extraordinary collection of submerged maritime resources, the 875 square mile area. Then next comes the fancy marketing pieces that you put out, that I read in December of 2014. More, this is what we're going to do. We're going to protect shipwrecks. This is what we're going to do. Then quietly, sometime in late 2016, 2017, NOAA's powers under the Sanctuary Act became public, how powerful you were and what you were going to do. Most who signed off on those nomination papers never learned about those powers, nor do they understand them today. All they remember is the fancy brochures that they saw. Then NOAA used its discretion to quietly expand the boundary to include Mequon. See page 6. In a small print you'll see, oh, now all of a sudden the boundary moved down to the county line. There's no shipwrecks in there. It's just you just took and moved it by over 20%. You moved the boundary by almost 20 to 25%. In March of 2017, we got a template at the Public Welfare Committee. It appeared to be a great deal, offering much for nothing in return. No details were provided. It was cleverly written and referenced Walker's successful 2014 sanctuary nomination. We weren't in that sanctuary nomination. Sure made it seem like we were, and it was tabled not because of a historical precedent. I read the minutes. It was tabled because we didn't know anything about it. Our Public Welfare Committee was smart enough to not be sold a marketing plan without knowing what it was. Kudos to the Public Welfare Committee of Mequon. If you read the resolution, you'll see it goes on. Based on the sanctuary nomination. We're not a part of your sanctuary. You just added it in there. I'm now told the same technique was used to have the communities and organizations to our north. Template resolutions, look how good this is, sign off on it, and then comes the ideas that you have. Since I discovered NOAA has no dedicated budget and rely on the Coast Guard and Historical Society and DNR and other state and local resources for enforcement, our state is already protecting the resources. The shipwrecks. NOAA is adding nothing. Since the nomination, NOAA's absolute and broad powers have also become known. Take a look at page 8 in your handout. It's irreversible, it's eternal, there's no budget, there's no fleet. You have no fleet to protect the shipwrecks. You moved it now, now you're talking 1,200 square miles. Continuing to expand even before it's been approved. I doubt that the governor knows that you expanded this down to included Mequon. Now, at this point in time, you continue. In NOAA's, I read, NOAA has authority over any resource, living or non-living, inside the sanctuary. NOAA's powers are broad and have become known to the public today. No pun intended, something's fishy about this marine sanctuary. Why does the federal government want control over our fresh water and natural resources? In Alpena, Michigan, one of the first things you did is outlaw metal detectors on the beach. Saw that, and then fishing near wrecks. Oh, you can't fish near those shipwrecks anymore. And your fines run from $5,000 to $170,000 per day per violation. Oh, you warn people ahead of time, but you can fine. They talked about 6-figure fines. Here's the thing that came up at public welfare last time, and you were surprised to even hear about this. Mequon's Bluff on Lake Michigan is the most unstable bluff anywhere in the Great Lakes. Anywhere. It's not Alpena's. Oh, Alpena didn't have these problems. Well, Alpena doesn't have bluffs that are falling into the lake. You seem completely unaware of that when you expanded it through Mequon, that we have this problem. The ordinary high water mark is the evidence of where the wave action hits the beach. From the water's edge, so you don't take it from the water's edge. You hit it where you think it hit. Where you think it hit the beach. It has nothing to do with a shipwreck, but next picture here. This next picture here is a picture of north of Concordia, well north of Concordia, down by my house. I live on Lake Michigan. One area to the north. Tell me where anybody could determine where are the waves hitting the beach, where are the waves having an effect on this beach. That ordinary high water mark could be anywhere from the water's edge to 20 feet up the bluff. It's caving in. That's north of Concordia. Where are you going to put rocks on there? You don't say we can never put rocks on there. You say piers and docks. How many piers and docks are there between Mequon and Green Bay that are privately owned on Lake Michigan that can stand the winter? Do you know that? One. And that gentleman who built that spent $150,000. He's just north of Concordia. He barges in rocks 3 to 5 tons now under DNR emergency permits in order to save all those properties south of Concordia that are falling into the lake. So we are saying, oh, we can do piers and docks, but not rocks. There's no reason to put a pier dock in there unless you need to use it for something, and that's what's happening down here. Look at the next page. we'll call this, it's a sort of a dark area. This is a bluff. This is a bluff right here, 2 doors down from Concordia to the south. The house next door has been abandoned because it might fall into Lake Michigan. That's a view from one side. The next page is looking a quarter mile down, north along the beach. Where is the ordinary high water mark? These bluffs are caving into Lake Michigan, and you're going to come along and you're not going to save these bluffs. These residents have to do it, and they have to do it now, and you're just another layer of support, a federal bureaucracy layer of support on top of the emergency permits that the DNR is doing a great job with today.
So,
no, I'm not done yet.
okay.
I'm not done yet. Landowners keep the title to the land, but NOAA has the say of what you can do with it. Taxpayers pay for it, but you have the final say of what they can do between the water line and the high water mark. That's your jurisdiction.
I mean, I'm not sure how this procedure works, but that's not accurate. I mean, as I mentioned, we're not adding a level of permitting.
Then why do you even have that? Why do you even have authority between the water level and the high water mark?
Mark.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So address the chair. Don't debate with each other, please.
Yeah. I'm happy to step through these. This is an awfully long list. Let me work on a couple. The ordinary high water mark. We chose it because it's the recognized DNR boundary. Is it confusing? Probably is. The mark on the shoreline. I think people have written about that. That's the state observed boundary that the state of Wisconsin manages cultural resources up to. So we chose that. Rather than create another one, that's why we chose it. If it's finicky and strange, that's sort of a separate matter, but we chose it to be consistent with how the state manages shipwrecks. The DNR letter, it does mention piers and docks. I think those are examples. Those were specific questions asked of the DNR, and the DNR said, we don't think this proposal, well, actually they said this proposal won't do those things. I think you could ask the DNR specifically also about the bluff work, and I would invite you to do that. Ask them how this proposal may influence that, and I hope and know that you'll find that they'll probably respond the same way they did to docks and piers. You mentioned metal detecting in Alpena being outlawed. Again, that's incorrect. There is not a prohibition from the sanctuary on metal detecting in Alpena. Same thing with fishing. Again, outlawing or regulating fishermen to certain spots. That's not true. That's not the case in Alpena. Back to the nomination. Again, the nomination was written by the state and the community, and you sort of indicated that this might have been sold a bill of goods on this. And many of the folks that wrote that nomination came to Alpena, and so they visited that sanctuary and did their due diligence, and I think that helped inform the nomination. You mentioned the boundary, which is important. With consultation with the state of Wisconsin, we did choose in our DEIS, again, a proposed boundary to go to the county line, so Manitowoc North and Ozaukee County South. That's true, and that's in the DEIS, and that's there available for public comment. And I'd be happy to keep working on the questions you've got.
So, I don't know, sometimes I don't know where to start with you. 875 was the square miles that you signed off in 2014.
Right, the nominated
Now it's 10,075. And you didn't come to Mequon and you added Mequon. You added Mequon. How did you add Mequon? What was your decision on adding Mequon without telling anybody about it? Does the governor know about it?
Well, we told lots of people about it. Again, this isn't done in a vacuum. So in consultation with the state of Wisconsin, it's a little bit like the ordinary high water mark. If there's a convenient delineated line, which in this case is a county line, that makes sense to use that as a boundary. Where this, again, 875 versus 1075 is the difference there. Some of that also occurs outward into the lake, where a shipwreck discovery was made after the nomination, and so the boundary pressed out that way. So again, some of that size increase comes from going to lake to include an additional historic resource.
Well, it went south. It went south through Mequon. There are no shipwrecks anywhere in Mequon, and I looked at your dots where you had them. The other thing is this one just moved up by about 25% from 875 to 1075 at the minimum that you want. Now, when you started with Alpena, what did you start with, and where is it at today?
When it was designated, it was 448 square miles, and in 2014, it expanded to 4,000 square miles, and that was done through public interest. The public asked us to do that. Our Sanctuary Council, and this is in our management plan, you can go and you can read this. Sanctuary Council said, hey, take a look at expanding the sanctuary. There's towns outlying Alpena that wish to be included in the sanctuary. It was driven by public interest. All of the documentation for that process, and that process looked exactly like this process to designate a sanctuary. It didn't occur overnight. It was a couple-year process with public comment period and all the pieces that go with this designation. All of that, the letters of support, the resolutions, I think somebody even flew out to Congress to testify for that, a member of the public, all of that is still online, and I would encourage you to investigate that online. I think that's misrepresenting that increase is mischaracterized.
Well, it did expand quite a bit. Anyway,
It did indeed.
getting back to
I couldn't agree more. It's a big expansion.
So I read somewhere. So maybe what I read, somebody lied where I read it, but it looked like one of the colorful brochures about the fishermen and about the metal detectors. But all right, I'll give you those two. Maybe I was wrong, but the rest of this stuff I'm not going to budge on. Here's the last part: do you understand why? Do you understand how much Lake Michigan rose in the last 7-8 years?
I do. It's connected hydrologically. It's the same lake as Lake Huron, and as I mentioned, I own property on Lake Huron, and I've seen it go way up and way down. So
Do you have
I
any
do
reason?
appreciate
Do you
that.
know what the reason is?
Could you tell me?
I'll tell you.
Okay.
4 years ago, one of the coldest winters we remember, the polar vortex. The polar vortex, the lake was so cold that it wouldn't evaporate. You would think from the NOAA would know that, but that's why it rose. I talked to a number of people, and actually the gentleman who built the pier showed me the research on that. We're having another cold winter. The lake level is 3.8 feet higher than it was 6 years ago. The bluffs are eroding, and we're at another layer of bureaucratic oversight over what the residents can do, and it's working beautifully now with the DNR and the emergency permits and a rock barged in on time.
To be clear, this is not adding another layer of bureaucracy to that process. And I would invite you to contact the DNR to see if that is indeed the case. And again, not to be obstinate, but I do feel that it's important to make that clear.
Okay, well, you can tell me, I live on Lake Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
I have a revetment, so I don't have a horse in this game. I'm fighting for the rest of the residents who don't have one. I built mine when the water was low. I paid 4 times what they're paying today because I had to regrade the entire bluff in order to do it. I didn't have a barge to come in and do it. But I did that back then. I know I've worked with the DNR. You're going to be another layer, and I read where it's an overlap. It's another layer. You don't need you have authority over my. If I want to go down and do something on my land that you don't like, you can stop it, and so can the DNR.
That's not correct, sir. It's incorrect.
Okay, I'm just going to finish up here.
Okay.
I'm not going to argue with you anymore. I've read this stuff and gone through it. We as aldermen are the government leaders of our community. This is a taking of rights from the residents of our community that they now have. We don't have control to stop this from happening, but we must do what we can. Ultimately, it is up to Governor Walker. Let's send him the message that the state of Wisconsin should not let the federal government determine how we use our state's natural resources. A number of our neighbors to the north have now signed resolutions opposing the sanctuary. The town of Two Creeks, the town of Holland, Cedar Grove, town of Gibson, and just this week, the town of Nelson Senator Dewey Strobel and others who signed the initial nomination papers for the sanctuary upon learning of the details are now publicly expressing their reservations. Your vote tonight sends a clear and precise message to the Lakeshore residents. Either you stand with them or they stand alone. Either you care about them or you don't. Please vote to approve this resolution opposing the NOAA Sanctuary. Mequon residents' properties are at stake.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Alderman Worth.
When this came to public welfare a year ago, I moved to table it for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't think it really was the business of the city to get involved. And two, I didn't think we had enough information. I expressed similar concerns when it went to public welfare, again, because we only had in front of us the information, the glossy brochure provided by NOAA. I have subsequently reversed my position, and I'm going to vote for the resolution tonight. Not because, and frankly, I've spent hours and hours going and reading the regulations and reading a lot of the news reports. The problem is, I don't know that we have reliable information from anybody. I don't trust necessarily the NOAA information. I also, some of the apocryphal stories about metal detectors and stuff, those were all in PR pieces and repeated in Ms. Perlman's letter, which is very well done, but she cites to a lot of opinion pieces. The bottom line is, I do think that this has an impact on, well, no, I can't be certain it doesn't have an impact on the residents along the lake. And therefore, because of that, I think we ought to be involved. And I don't know that there is any benefit that I see to Mequon residents in having this done. I spend a lot of time on Lake Michigan. I have a boat on Lake Michigan. I appreciate maritime history. I appreciate those sunken ships, although some of them have been there for 150 years and they've done just fine without NOAA getting involved. And they will continue to. And if NOAA had regulations that were carefully tailored and were clear, and we knew that this wasn't going to have an impact on our residents, wasn't going to have an impact on shorelines or the area along beaches, well, then I'd go back to where I was before and say we shouldn't be involved. But that's not the way the regulations are written. And frankly, I don't think we ever should invite another layer of government to get involved in anything unless they're the only layer of government that can do it. And NOAA isn't the only layer of government that can do this. The DNR has adequate ability to protect ships, sunken ships, and therefore there is no reason to support this that anybody's provided to me. And there are concerns about the extent of the federal government behemoth's ever-expanding regulatory powers. If Congress was passing this, I could read a piece of legislation and at least trust they'd have to add another piece of regulation to change it. But changing the administrative code is something that happens in the deep bowels of the federal government in some sort of abyss that nobody can follow, understand, or know what's going on. And yeah, there's a public comment period, but it never means anything. So I urge everybody to vote for this resolution tonight because I don't see any good reason not to.
Does anybody have a motion?
And I'll move approval.
Second.
I have a question beforehand.
We have a motion and a second. Alderman Schneider.
So could you just, given Alderman Worth's commentary, could you explain what exactly NOAA would add, given the fact that the enforcement duties would fall upon the same people who enforce that area now, which would be Wisconsin and the DNR? What would you say NOAA adds to this?
Right. I'll start that, and then John Bryhan from the Wisconsin Historical Society, who is the state archaeologist for Wisconsin, I think can add to that and would be helpful. From a resource protection standpoint, it does add a new regulation, and this pertains to those great shipwrecks that are out there in the lake that are deep and fragile, and that's the no anchoring prohibition. That's substantially more protection than offered by the state of Wisconsin. The research capacity that would come with the National Marine Sanctuary would complement very much the work that the Wisconsin Historical Society is doing. It's a program I worked for in the early 2000s. I understand that program very well, and I think what they see is the benefit of additional resources to research these places and to monitor them and to protect them, to carry out resource protection, install something like mooring buoys, for example. Again, when we say protection in the Marine Sanctuary Program, we mean sort of a comprehensive set, which includes education, and this is, I think, a critical part to what sanctuaries do. I would encourage you to read our management plan, and again, I could go on and on about this. It's published, it's there, and it is a roadmap for the sanctuary, and the way education would dovetail with resource protection and the specific things we would seek to do on that score. So that's there, it's available for you to read. And then finally, in the spirit of the nomination, again, this comes directly from the nomination, and it is this idea of bringing national attention to an area of Lake Michigan that would have positive community impacts. Those are noted in the nomination package, from the Wisconsin Maritime Museum all the way down to Port Explorerium, not that far away. Those are people who see this national recognition, grant dollars that NOAA would be able to bring in, and just the inherent expertise and increased staff that would be here to knit these communities together for, again, a coordinated stretch of Lake Michigan that adds on the work that they've been doing. And again, that's a convoluted way of saying, check out the management plan for the details of how that would work and what they seek to accomplish.
Alderman Worth.
Are you suggesting that the DNR couldn't add that regulation to protect from anchoring?
Maybe they could.
So we don't need you to do that. Research and education, couldn't you do that without a sanctuary?
I think at a scale that is envisioned in the nomination, no.
Why?
Because there's not enough people and resources to do it.
Where does it come from? Because there happens to be a sanctuary.
It comes from it comes from the sanctuary and its core budget and its people and its staff and its expertise.
Couldn't do that without declaring a sanctuary?
I don't think so in this case. These are elements of the National Marine Sanctuary Program that would require a sanctuary.
And I've spent a lot of time in Alpena, having had relatives there, and I didn't see a tremendous impact or a lot of tourism. Now, I'm sure there's some, just like people don't notice the boating impact in some communities, but I'm still not buying it. But I don't want to debate, I should stay out of this. I don't want to debate the greater merits. I think in representing the people of Mequon, I don't get the benefit, and I do see the potential additional regulation.
Thank you. Alderman Bushy.
First, I would like to thank everyone who has shown up out here tonight and spoke. They're going to points I bring up have already been mostly stated here. My first thought with this entire process, when I first heard it months back, is the thought, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And I don't see that we have a broken system here. If I was marketing this effort, I would talk about things that were taken from shipwrecks or something, that a failure, and there is not an apparent failure in anything that Wisconsin is doing right now. There's, as everyone's mentioned, there's multiple layers being added here, and it's the old adage that's been said a long time ago. And it's kind of funny that I'm saying it from here, is the phrase, we're from the government and we're here to help. That's something here that concerns, and I don't think would apply here at all. And as I looked at it, if I was coming up with this plan and see this whole 1,000+ square miles, and you're protecting the downed ships, I would be drawing a circle around those ships and saying these are the protected areas, instead of causing all of this difficulty that we see here, expressed tonight. And so that, I would see the optimal solution actually coming from NOAA is to act as consultants and help support any deficiencies that they saw with the Wisconsin oversight, and provide the resources to Wisconsin to work at the local level.
Alderman Nurbin.
I think we heard it loud and clear from the residents tonight. They're concerned about their bluffs and their property, and not so much about the shipwrecks. And I understand it's been stated again and again, there's no intended impact, but if we can't be absolutely certain of that, I'm not willing to take that risk on behalf of all the homeowners along the lake. So I just can't find a reason to support it. There's a little bit, if there's a shred of risk, you can't take that leap of faith.
Call the question.
Any further comments?
Yeah, I've got a comment.
Alderman Hawkins.
Thank you all for coming tonight, for expressing your opinions. I totally agree with pretty much what the majority of the folks tonight have said, particularly Alderman Girl, that this starts out as very well intentioned, but it is, after all, described as the Lake Michigan Sanctuary, which initially didn't touch upon Mequon, but over time eventually did. So maybe the high water mark was a poor choice of wording for the sanctuary, but they did pick that, and that touches upon our shores, and it touches upon land that's owned by Mequon residents. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us here to do what we can to protect the rights of the citizens of Mequon. All of us don't live on the shore, most of us don't, but we are here to stand where we can for the rights of our citizens. I grew up on the East Coast, and when I was a child, most of Cape Cod, let's be specific, Cape Cod was owned by private homeowners. Well, in the early 60s, the federal government decided that they were going to take over half of Cape Cod, and they called it the National Seashore. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the country where I've been going since I was a kid. The beaches are protected. However, the homeowners in the National Seashore, since that time, and this is approaching 60 years now, haven't been able to do a darn thing with their property. They could have a home that they built back in the 50s or 40s or 30s, but come 1963, the federal government stopped it with a beautiful proposal. They have the National Seashore. It's protected. There's a lot of good things they did, but the poor homeowners, if you own property there, you were stuck.
John, that's the year I was born, and that's nowhere near 60 years ago.
Okay. Oh, well, all right. I wasn't going to bring this up, but Ms. Perlman, it was stated was, and I totally agree with what she wrote, by the way, but Ms. Perlman was of the first class of Princeton University that accepted women. I was a member of the last class of Princeton University that was male only. That's not why I liked her letter. I liked her letter because it was very well written and support.
That's a little.
I'm going to support the resolution tonight.
Too much information, Sean.
Yeah. I know.
Call the question, Your Honor.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve resolution 3491. Will you please call the roll?
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk.
Happy to say aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye. 8-0. The resolution is adopted. Mr. Green, thank you very much for your time. Yeah. Thank you all for coming out and expressing your opinion. We're going to take a short break.
Short break. Don't do that.
Hey, Glenn.
I said aye that time.
He loses.
He's gonna win hands down.
Yeah, well, I knew it.
with the issuance of a request for proposals for the design of the Civic Campus parking lot. Director Tollison.
Thanks, Mayor. Staff continues to focus on developing the town center, addressing goals and necessary improvements. And of course, given some of the conversations we've had over the last several months, one of the necessary improvements from staff's perspective, and I think from the council as a whole, is to look at reconstruction of the City Hall parking lot. It was identified initially in the Town Center TIF project plan in 2008, and then at a committee of the whole session in June of 2016, there was direction to demolish the Logaman Center and at least establish some additional temporary parking while we looked at considering reconstruction of the lot in its entirety. I think we can all acknowledge that the lot is in poor condition. It does not comply with code standards, and there certainly has been an expressed interest for increasing the demand, or expressed interest in demand in order to expand the parking capacity. In the last 18 months, staff has developed some concepts as it relates to expansion of the parking lot. In those concepts, it's mostly focused on maximizing parking, and I think we've all acknowledged that there is a greater interest than just parking expansion for this particular parking lot. We have other goals that include pedestrian connectivity, traffic and maneuverability efficiencies, and town center streetscaping improvements for the area as well. As part of those 18 months of discussions, we've identified additional funding sources for reconstruction of the lot. One of those in particular that I'll mention is the Green Solutions funding that's available by MMSD. Those dollars need to be expended in 2018. In addition to that, we've obviously completed a traffic and parking study, and during that same time frame, we've had town center investors submit proposals and come forward at public meetings to discuss assistance in terms of a partnership. So as we've continued our efforts, one of the things we're presenting to you tonight is an outline of potential public funding sources and the development of a scope of services for reconstruction of the parking lot in 2018. Since that time, since January, we've also furthered discussions with partnerships with both Lockery and Foxtown. Our timeline contemplates the completed construction for November of 2018 as an opportunity to take advantage of those green solution funding sources, as well as what we expect and hope as those continued partnerships with those entities. So our questions for you tonight is there an interest by the council and consensus that we should pursue reconstruction of this lot in 2018? Obviously, an advantage is to take opportunity is to take advantage of the $220,000 available through the Green Solutions. Does the scope of services that we've outlined accomplish what the council's interests are? And then, are there any other contingencies related to end goals or the result of reconstruction of this lot that we need to know as we go through this process and as we continue to have discussions about our partnerships with the two other entities? We'd like that feedback before we further those conversations or continue this process for reconstruction.
Okay, I'll start. Yes to the first question and yes to the second question. I think you've hit all the points that need to be in there for consideration of the parking lot. Alderman Strelchuk.
I'd like to see the lot done in 2018 or something done on 2018, so taking advantage of those funds, it would be critical, and I think the time is now. We've had funds set aside for that area previously, knowing that there's a need for resurfacing. I do, however, as when I called you or to talk on the phone and ask you about this, I do have concern with moving too far forward with an RFP until we know exactly where the stakeholders sit, Foxtown and Lockery being the two that have been identified. We want to make sure that that scope is understood. I think what the city's done in the past is they've thrown out an RFP for redesign, but until we know what some of the scope is from those two stakeholders, I don't know that we have enough information to do an RFP. Things that I would like to see done on this is it was identified the bicycle wayfinding, but I'd like, if we could, find a way to just have specific markings for bicycle traffic from the interurban to use MTC1, get to City Hall, safe passage, maybe just identified marked lines or something that really shows that that's an integral part with the interurban trail and the desire to have bicycle traffic come to support our businesses, the MTC1, Spur 16, whatever, just identify that clearly. If there is any opportunity for some sense of a trailhead, as a bicyclist, I'm always supportive of it, in this process. So some sort of a, trailhead, a covered facility, allowing small repair center or compressed air for flat tires, water, filtered water, things like that. I mean, those are things that I've always envisioned for that space that I think now is the opportunity to integrate that in there. But again, rewinding slightly, making sure that we talk to those stakeholders before we go to that RFP to understand what our RFP is, instead of saying, well, let's see what they come back with. I don't want to waste city funds on wondering what we want. I want to know what we want, get an RFP on what we want, and then proceed with it effectively in 2018 if possible.
Okay.
Alderman Worth?
I have a couple of questions. He talks about that this is for part of the lot, the southern portion of the civic campus. Where is that?
I just mean everything basically south of the baseball field, the outfield of the baseball
So this
facility.
is
So not like
including
part of the
Logamin.
library.
This is not, or does it include Logamin?
It does include Logamin, and I would say that the boundaries of the slope that we would want to address would at least come north through the portion back here behind City Hall that serves as a major pedestrian link to get to the pool and the baseball field.
Well, I think it would be great if we can get the money that's here, but before we go too far, and frankly, before I'll vote to actually appropriate the money, I want to see what Foxtown, are they for real on their proposal, and is Lockery going to participate, and to what degree, and what procedures and changes we're going to make to parking, for example, to assist the Legion. And frankly, I'd also think that it might be worthwhile, Alderman Nurbin brought this up at one point, to look at least what would the cost be to potentially move the Legion to the Logamin site, which would actually solve their problems and expand parking for Town Center 1 and the Civic Campus. I don't know if that's feasible. My gut says maybe not, but I don't want to go and build a lot without at least looking at that as a potential solution.
Okay.
But I think that there is a lot to do before you lock in something, and my concern is if we don't have some of these answers addressed, we will have sent out an RFP and then start formulating other policy issues or things that we're interested in doing, and they won't be addressed in the RFP, and we'll have to step back unless we've done some of this. Now, maybe the partners are I don't want to call them partners, the contributors, maybe that's simply a source of funds, and it's not as important, but it needs to be addressed before we go spend the money. But I also think things like, we spent a lot of time talking about some of the deficiencies at Town Center 1, and haven't done anything to address any of them, other than we're talking about building a few more parking spaces that nobody will want to use. So, for example, all the reserve spots that they have, for example, the ability of the Legion, if it can't be moved, to use its own parking when it has events. I think that there are some policy things that need to be addressed. And I hope that those happen, for example, at the March meeting. But, should we move forward? Yes, we do need to repave a parking lot. But is this our whole answer? I sure hope not.
Alderman Nurbin?
Yeah, I was going to bring up that idea I came up with a couple months ago as well. It would offer some optimization of the entirety of all the parking in town center, not just necessarily focused on the currently city-owned portion. And I think, to Alderman Worth's point, finding a solution for the Legion has got to be in this. And I think we've got more degrees of freedom now than we had when we put in Town Center 1, because more land is in play. I could see where multiple entities come together to partner in some way. So I don't know if we'll get everything from one RFP applicant. Maybe there can be a blending of ideas. I just hope we're open to finding an optimal solution. I do agree we need to do the parking lot, though. It's in rough shape, and we do need at least a little bit more parking at the bottom of the hill down from Town Center 1. So should we move forward? Yes, but I agree. We need to find optimal solutions. I hope we're just not leaving anything off the table at this point. We're going to get one chance to get this right.
Alderman Bushy.
I'm still wondering, actually, is concerning Logan Center. With discussions prior to actually my coming here, is that there was an agreement to go with both plans. That was the Logan Center restaurant and the Foxtown Ventures redevelopment of the whole area from the baseball diamond pool, etc. And so one of those ideas is no longer on the table, but that still means the other, which had included removal of the Logan Center, repositioning of the baseball diamond. And so my big concern is, I've seen this a number of times, commuting to Milwaukee, is that they repave a road, and then 2 months later, they tear it up to put in a new sewer line or something. And I'm concerned that we're going to pave something here, and then several months later, Logan Center is going to be demolished by whatever plan, and we're going to end up undoing the work that we just spent money on.
Well, that is part of the process that we're embarking on. I mean, as part of the timeline, we were giving ourselves some opportunities to evaluate both short-term end goal of reconstruction of the parking lot and the longer range goal of what other functionality or improvements that we want as part of the civic campus. So I think the discussions thus far with both of those entities, the dynamic and the partnership is somewhat different. I think the conversation with property owners locally of MTC1 have a different end goal with a shorter turnaround time frame than really the conversations with Foxtown. But what we want to do is bring everybody to the table to make sure that we are not backing ourselves into a corner with potential future plans, whether that's some type of facility associated with the interurban trail or expanded services as part of the civic campus. But we're going to have to break some of that down if we choose to do some construction of the parking lot in 2018. And that's the time frame outlined in the staff report gives us the opportunity to do that.
Alderman Meyer.
So why don't we get the people from Foxtown, the stakeholders, and get them together in a relatively short period of time here with council members or select members of the council, and let's get some of these things hammered out in a relatively short period of time so we can get this out and possibly still use some of the funds for green solution then.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way we're going to do it. If everybody's got a few ideas to do this and a few ideas to do that, I mean, we need to get them down on paper so that you can get an RFP out. And so we can also know the intentions of Foxtown, also the intentions of the stakeholders. Are they still, at this time, contributing $200,000?
Mm-hmm.
They talked about beforehand.
Yeah.
Are they still committed to that? Is Foxtown committed to X amount to help along with this so that we can make a better decision going into it and give them our ideas what we'd like to see. But I mean, we need to get together to do that.
We have had those levels of discussion and engagement with both of those entities since the beginning of January, and there is some draft documentation being exchanged between both of those groups, and there's been weekly dialogue about that. I think we're trying to take the opportunity with all of you tonight to make sure that the goals that we assume the council has as it relates to the parking lot reconstruction are what we're representing in those discussions. And we as staff are encouraging representatives of both of those groups to let us know what their reactions are to the information we've put in front of them and what, if any, other contingencies they have as it relates to any cost sharing or financial contribution that they're willing to do.
So I guess the biggest thing one of the biggest things that comes out of this is the possibility of seeing what it costs to switch over the Legion over to the other area, and also Alderman Strelchuk's suggestion on a biking station or something aside. But the rest of it, to send an RFP on the design of it and cost inside of the actual parking thing, and that shouldn't hold us up too long.
Well, we have a goal in May of 2018, or a requirement in May of 2018, in which we need to identify what that project plan is with MMSD and the Green Solutions. So we're trying to firm up what exactly the partnership or the memorandum of understanding would be with the two entities and what the cost sharing would be, so that we can make a decision on the use of those Green Solution dollars by May. And then as part of that process and through until July, be working with the stakeholders and the Common Council to make decisions about the reconstruction and the design and to what extent.
So I don't have an issue moving forward with this.
Yeah, we're just trying to make sure that we're representing what the council's interests are as we continue this dialogue with those two potential partners, and even to make sure that we still want to push for reconstruction in 2018 and leverage those Green Solution dollars.
Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Director Tollefson, to clarify, what staff is seeking this evening is authorization from the council to let an RFP to seek proposals or solicitations from a designer that we would then contract with to design the parking lot over the second quarter of 2018. And given all the points that have been raised by various members of the council here this evening, presumably we could pursue that information gathering exercise and a special meeting simultaneous to the RFP being put out on the street and getting proposals from design firms, so that we don't get behind the ball from a timing standpoint, because at the end of the day we're still going to have to pull the trigger on awarding a design contract to whoever responds to the RFP. My recommendation would be to get that RFP out sooner rather than later and get you the information that you've requested here tonight, so that you can make an informed decision all at once, and we don't lose potentially $420,000 worth of free money to reconstruct the parking lot.
Alderman Worth.
When through your I don't know how many points you have under number 1, various design elements, you have compliance with federal guidelines related to ADA parking spaces. I would also hope that, and that in conjunction with the somewhere you talk about pedestrian routes and what have you, that there's some view to minimizing the difficulty of people who have limited mobility to get from the lower level to the upper level also. And maybe it just shouldn't be minimum compliance with the federal guidelines related to ADA, but a more focused approach to trying to make this a more accessible parking lot.
Sure, explore opportunities for that customer base.
Which is more and more of all of Mequon.
Yeah.
Alderman Strelchuk.
I'm all for getting the RFP process going. I just don't know that we know the scope of it, and I don't want to see an RFP going out. If they're interested in giving us a proposal, getting that list going now, I see a benefit to that. But if we're going to ask for the design services. I think we need to talk about the scope that we've agreed on, and until we talk to those stakeholders, I disagree that it can be simultaneous 100%. I think there's some crossover that can happen, but sending out an RFP if we don't know the scope of what we want to do on a project, it could actually push us back further, because we'd already be in the RFP process, and then we wouldn't want to interrupt it because we had the funding available, instead of waiting just 1 month to get our ducks in a row, talk to the stakeholders, figure out what the contributions are, what the ideas are, find out what we need to discuss at the next council meeting, and then move forward with the RFP after that. I think that's appropriate leadership. I think we're giving them direction. I think we're giving staff direction on what to get the RFP on. And then we'll get a better RFP versus a very evasive one.
Well, there's a list of elements here.
Yeah, what else do you want?
That go into the RFP. So if you have any comments on that list. Anybody else? Okay, you got what you need?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Moving on to Ordinance 1513, amending chapters 10 and 58 of the Mequon Municipal Code as it relates to sump pump discharge. These next couple items here, well, this item is on committee of the whole because past practice, we have always brought zoning code chapter 58 changes to the committee of the whole. I don't know that we need a whole lot of discussion on this, but
Then I will not offer
Director
any
Lundin.
unless you have any questions.
okay. We're moving sump pump discharge from chapter 10 to chapter 58 in accordance with state regulations.
For that limited, which one did was, I saw two hands.
Alderman
Go ahead. For that limited purpose, you know, it makes sense. I do, at some point, it would be nice to have, and I wish I had been at the planning commission meeting where this was discussed a little bit more. The ability, you know, some of our regulations seem like overkill in areas where there isn't a problem, where you need to direct the water certain directions, or you can't put an underground cistern in your yard, or certain other things, that the policies behind this. But if our whole purpose is simply to relocate the ordinance, fine. But I think that at some point it might be worthwhile having a more thorough discussion about why we have the rules we have, because I get a lot of complaints about them. I don't know if that today is that time.
It's not exactly on the agenda.
I'm good.
Well, it is, this ordinance is, but
In general, the goal is to direct the runoff from a sump pump to an approved drainage way, not across the neighbor's property, which is where we get the majority of the complaints, so. That's the short end of it. I'm happy.
Why an underground cistern, for example? Why is that not allowed?
And not necessarily knowing exactly what you mean from an underground cistern. We do, depending on what it is, it would be the limitations on the capacity of the cistern itself. I mean, some pumps have to discharge to, eventually discharge to grade. Obviously, we're seeing more and more subdivisions now with storm sewer systems. So in those, there are some pump collection systems, and in that respect, they essentially do discharge to a cistern. It just eventually gets to a point where it's discharged. We just have the majority of property in the city that is more of a rural setting, so they discharge to grade, and we just, again, have to be sure that that eventually goes to an approved drainage way instead of negatively impacting neighboring property.
In my prior house, there was part of the gray water discharged into a drain field, a tile, because it was rural. And before selling it, I had to change that so that it no longer did, and it never made any sense to me that why that would not, why that either needed to go into a septic system or onto the backyard made no sense whatsoever.
Part of that may have to be addressed by the plumbing inspector. I can obviously only address the stormwater aspect of it, so the actual regulations with respect to why it can't go into a cistern, but argue that at some point you're also trying to mitigate the risk in a sump pump collection system to backwaters into the property, that if you're discharging to even a system underground, surcharging in the groundwater could back up into the pipe and subsequently lead to water in the basement.
In 50 years, it hadn't, but
I-
anyhow, I know.
Again,
That's
you'd,
fine.
if you had a good backflow preventer, ideally that would take care of it too, so.
Any other questions with ordinance 1513? We'll move on to resolution 3495, authorizing amendment to the 2018 employee compensation plan in connection with establishing the non-represented position of deputy fire chief at pay grade 15.
Move approval.
No.
This is committee of the whole. This
Oh, I'm
is-
sorry, committee of the whole.
Do you have any questions?
Coming down.
Don't we
Yeah.
need to recommend these to the council? You do. Even the last one?
This was recommended by the Finance Personnel Committee.
But the last one, don't we need to
The
recommend?
last one was recommended by the Planning Commission.
Yeah, but a committee is required to make a recommendation also, under our ordinances, not the plan commission. That's why we send it to the standing committee. So that's why, I will move approval of the last item.
Second.
Okay. Call the roll.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrell.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
8-0, and that's approved. Resolution 3495. Anybody have any questions? Like I said, this was recommended by, well, it was recommended by Public Safety to create the position, and the pay grade was recommended by the Finance Personnel Committee, in line with all the other deputies we have in our city. Moving on, resolution, ordinance 1514, amending section 5841 of the Mequon Municipal Code, establishing a regular meeting schedule for the Board of Appeals, recommended by Planning Commission. Anybody have any questions?
Are we still in the committee of the whole, or are we?
We're a committee of the whole.
Okay.
The reason these chapter 58 things are on committee of the whole is because of past practice. It's not because we have to approve them.
Well, by our ordinance, if it has to either go to a standing committee or the committee of the whole, plan commission can't be, can't recommend a text amendment without it also going to a committee of the council. But this did go to a committee of the council.
Moving on. Oh, yeah. Public welfare. Okay. We'll reconvene as common council. Take up ordinance 1513, amending chapters 10 and 58 of the Mequon Municipal Code as it relates to sump pump discharge.
Move approval. Second.
First reading.
Oh.
Ordinance 1514, amending section 5841 of the Mequon Municipal Code, establishing a regular meeting schedule for the Board of Appeals, recommended by Public Welfare in December, by Planning Commission in January. First reading. Ordinance 1515, amending Chapter 2 of the Mequon Municipal Code relating to the accrual and use of paid time off by employees. This was recommended by the Finance Personnel Committee. It's the first reading. Moving on to resolutions. Resolution 3491 we already dealt with. Resolution 3492, approving a citywide public communications policy. This was recommended by Public Welfare Committee in January. Looking for a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Alderman Worth.
I would offer an amendment on page 11. There is a list of items and various organizations that, to which we are allowed to provide links on the website. And I would add, as number 4, houses of worship as an amendment.
It's a motion.
Yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a second. Is there discussion?
I'll give you my rationale.
Okay.
I don't see why charitable organizations, schools, and other organizations that are non-governmental, we may put information regarding them. If part of our purpose of our website is to introduce the city to potential residents and what have you, I would think houses of worship also are something that somebody may assess or look at when they're trying to determine whether this is a good place to live. It's not endorsing any one particular house of worship or any particular religion, but it gives a better picture of our community.
We're just providing a link.
Yeah.
You're not debating with me, I'm just seeing if anybody wants to. We'll have a vote on the motion to amend. Call the roll.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Stralchek.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
8-0, and the amendment is adopted. The main motion. I lost my place. Okay. Main motion for Resolution 3492.
We had a motion, didn't we?
had the motion.
We do.
Yeah.
Call the roll.
Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Stralchek.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
8-0, and that is adopted. Resolution 3495, authorizing an amendment to the 2018 Employee Compensation Plan in connection with establishing the non-represented position of Deputy Fire Chief at pay grade 15, recommended by Public Safety in January and recommended by Finance personnel this evening.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Stralchek.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
8-0, and that resolution is adopted. Resolution 3489, approving a contract for the design of the Town Center Community Gateway to Growth Design Group Incorporated of Cedarburg, Wisconsin, in an amount not to exceed $60,000. This was recommended by Finance Personnel Committee this evening.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Alderman Garrow.
I just wonder where the money is coming from.
From the TIF district.
During the budgeting process, we explored some funding opportunities or sources. It was ultimately concluded that the Town Center TIF district would be the appropriate funding source.
I thought we exhausted those funds back when we bought the Wells property. I know that that was stated by some of the aldermen. The funds were exhausted when we bought the Wells property for the $1.5 million. Where's this $60,000 coming from?
We continue to make expenditures out of the TIF project plan, including expenditures for the parking and traffic analysis. In my discussions with Ellers, both the current projects that occurred in 2017, Dermond and the Reserve, the increment that we'll gain just from those two projects alone will cover the ultimate 150 if we end up creating a design for the gateway that results in that full expenditure.
I asked Mr. Watkins, I asked where we're at with those TIDs. TID 3 has a project deficit of about $500,000 and a debt service deficit of $1.2 million. So now we're just going to take another $60,000.
Well, we also have over $100 million of construction in two projects that are underway and approved.
I think it'd be more.
And that doesn't even include any unanticipated, those are known projects coming on board in the next year.
I think it'd be more appropriate to spend the money when we have it than just continue to add to the deficit.
Mr. Alchuk.
I'd like to highlight that based on the development agreements that we have in place, the TIF is expected to close early. The commitment on the city was to close the TIF by the agreed upon date, and it's with the construction in place and then the new construction that's coming online, that's in the works and some of the approval processes, the TIF's even going to be accelerated even a little bit more. In finance and personnel, we did discuss this pretty extensively. We wanted to make sure that we were diligent with city funds. Some of the premise and some of the discussion in finance and personnel was a gateway feature for the town center district has always been discussed. There's going to be some budgeting for it. There's going to be an expenditure that was planned from the beginning and can be paid for with the TIF, by the TIF closing still on time or early. The funded amount of $60,000 was questioned by one of my residents, and I brought that forth in finance and personnel. What's that going to? It's a pretty extensive pretty extensive use of the funds. It's going to go to the design, working both with City of Mequon and communication and working with Thiensville. It's going to, so we've come to a design agreement with council. They would be working through the bid process, assisting city staff with RFPs on the construction of whatever the agreed on design was. And then also, and at that point, it became, pretty reasonable. But then they'd also be essentially general contracting. So while the work's being done, they'd be overseeing the project to make sure that it was being done according to the RFP and according to the bids accurately. So it's $60,000. It's a larger dollar amount, but it is spread over a long period of time with a lot of services that do come to the city. I'd be surprised if the city didn't realize additional savings on the project by having them involved. And the amount of work that was proposed in the packets that we received that they've done and the quality of projects they've done would represent our city well, because we do want a quality gateway feature at that location.
Alderman Bushy.
As you know from the previous meeting, that I have a number of questions with this, and in going through this, I have a number of questions and a couple of comments through this process. And one of the things starting out is this whole process with the RFQ, and I finally kind of figured out today that there's something that's making me uncomfortable about this, and that is the approach as far as we've had a couple short presentations at meetings concerning the Gateway project as an overall. Then I noticed on our website that there was the RFQ, which had details in there as to what ultimately the proposed growth design is going to work on. And as I ask questions, I end up actually having more questions as a result. And looking at that document, for example, on the website with the RFQ, there is this JJR master document, and I've seen in here there's a North Park, a South Park, there's total costs of, in one of these pages, of $2.2 million, and I'm trying to wrap my head around, first of all, what is it that is ultimately going on here? I'd like to see this in a scope of an overall project plan as opposed to something that's piecemeal. As far as, is this expenditure of $60,000 going to lead to another, to another, to another? Where is this going to? And then it still goes back to the legal question that I had raised before, and that is trying to understand that if we initially did the TID funding for X number of dollars, and if those funds are exhausted, we're getting revenue coming back in from the current companies locally and the others that are in the town center area from their tax payments, that are we using this somewhat as a fund that's outside of our budget that keeps on going around? And I'm just trying to figure out, if is the objective here we have to pay off that TID as soon as possible? Can we be essentially taking the dollars? Are we end up going over what the initial amount was? So those are a couple of questions I have. And then overall, as far as looking at this design, I've still, I've seen some great pictures from growth, for example, as to different projects they've worked on. But again, looking at the other documents, I don't know, is this going to be somewhat of a monument? Is it including an amphitheater? You know, what is it that is ultimately being created, and is that, again, the end point? And looking at it from a family-friendly perspective, if I'm coming here to this gateway and there's the nice walk path through there now with my kids, you know, first of all, we have to go back to actually what was raised before is the parking issue, is where people are going to park. And look at family-friendly, I'm going to again go and just add my 2 cents about the whole town center project is that I'd like to see going along to family friendly is that there are places, you know, we've been discussing, we have, you know, the cafes, there's a lot of places I think for young adults, but we don't have the pizza type place in here. We have, you know, brewery talked, Dairy Queen isn't in here, something for kids, for families, you know, coming in. I'd like to see that, you know, if this is family friendly attraction here. And then final point is I actually had the opportunity last week to speak to the government body with the Mecklenburg-Thiensville Chamber of Commerce. And one of the things they asked me to do was discuss some of the issues that I've encountered the last 9 months. So I put together a little heat map for them essentially as to the discussions. And when I joined all of Thiensville here, highlighting the points, almost all the focus has been this downtown area. And it's been raised before by a couple of the other aldermen when talking a sewer project. I also look at that in order to look at Mequon growth, and that's what we're up here representing, that there's this huge emphasis and time that we have spent on this town center, Spur 16, the Foxtown development potential, the gateway here, and I think that we also need to be emphasizing going north on Port Washington Road towards Pioneer, providing the services there and obtaining tax dollars from businesses that would move in there. And while I'm still on the fence with the current proposal here, I can't see continuing to put money into the downtown development without positive plans in place for other 48 square miles of Mequon. So I hope you can deduce from that the two starting out questions.
Those are much broader policy discussions related to development. There is a plan that consumed staff resources, council time, public input, property owner input for other locations in the city, including the area that you reference on Port Washington Road from Highland to Pioneer. There was a neighborhood land use study. There were consultant dollars spent on that land use neighborhood plan. From the planning perspective, we've done everything we could in that particular neighborhood until we address infrastructure issues. And so we could go through various geographic locations throughout the city, and I can speak to you on the status of development and the proactive and reactive steps that we are doing as it relates to development. I think as it relates to town center, you're hearing a great deal about it is because we put forth plans and consulting dollars and documents to express what our desire is and to motivate the private market to respond to the redevelopment of this area that was underutilized. Assessments were not increasing on those properties. And frankly, we have some blighted conditions in town center. So all of that work was the impetus to get the private market to respond. The private market is responding, and we are being successful with redevelopment, and we have to react to those development proposals. Between Spur 16 and Foxtown alone, we're talking about over $100 million of tax increment that definitely deserves, our attention and staff resources. That's a little bit separate issue than the gateway feature. I mean, it's one of a number of public infrastructure improvements that we identified as part of the TIF project plan. I think why this one's maybe rising to a greater level of interest at this particular time is because we had, in the last year or so, a number of representatives from community foundations come forward and speak to administration, the mayor's office, and our department about their interest in support supporting through some private funding the implementation of a feature. And because of that conversation with multiple individuals around the table, the mayor chose to develop an ad hoc committee. And we also have an opportunity to partner with the Village of Thiensville on one of the initial goals of Town Center in terms of creating identification of what was intended to be a unique neighborhood, but also intended to bring attention and direction to the businesses, not only in Mequon, but in Thiensville. And Thiensville has a seat at the table at the committee. So do a number of those representatives of those community groups have a seat at the table on this particular committee. And Thiensville has the opportunity and is suggesting that they would offer a financial contribution to the actual construction of the feature.
So to the first point then, where is this, is this the final part of the phase projects? There was a north-south park. Where's this going to as far as, is this project
The riverfront is identified obviously as a main asset in the neighborhood. I mean, it would be in any community, right? There have been strategic and phased improvements as part of the riverfront, both in Thiensville and Mequon. The river walk, as part of the Milwaukee River, directly across the street from us, is one component of a multi-phased rotary river walk that is constructed by the local Rotarians. Even those physical improvements have been public and private partnerships between those groups and the city. There are plans for Town Center that go well beyond just the gateway feature and the park. So it's much more than just specific improvements in the park. There are a number of public infrastructure improvements and aesthetics that the communities wish to do. We just haven't done them yet.
I'm not quite sure you answered his question, though.
Yeah.
And that is, the gateway is really the monument on the corner, the gateway feature. This has nothing to do with other park improvements, which may or may not be made in the future. This is similar to what you might see outside of a high-end subdivision. And frankly, at some of our high-end subdivisions, they spent a lot more money than this in doing their entrance feature. So this is simply an entrance feature on the corner. It may clear off some other space, it may do a few other things, but it's not doing all the improvements in the park.
Right, it's one phase of that riverfront park master plan, but it's more than just the gateway. I mean, we're hoping to complete the pedestrian connections and the curbing as part of this, and the sidewalks around that corner.
But it's not putting in the amphitheater.
No, it's not anything down in the base of the park near the river.
Excuse me. You know, I have a little tough time spending the 60 grand on not knowing what we're going to get. And what I mean is that I know the committee has done a lot of work on and recommends this design group to do something for us, but have they given any direction on what we're looking to get, or is it just wide open to them to come forward with a design and then maybe we go, ugh? That's happened in the past where we've had we had a few years back and they wanted to have design features in every entranceway and somebody was going to donate that to us, and we took a look at it and said, oh God, thank you, but we'll kind of pass on that. So and I probably, if Connie would have been here, she could have probably given us a little more idea of what the process they went through inside of this if they looked at some certain designs. Because in the past, we've had different design groups that have come forward on projects or whatever and have said, here's our concept of doing that, and then we've looked at that and said, hey, we like that from that design group too, and let's move forward with them. This seems like they kind of picked a design group on projects that they've done in the past. They reckon they're nice projects, but nothing that really has been specific saying, here's what we'd like to do for Mequon. So I'm kind of,
Sure.
I haven't seen any.
The RFQ identified previous gateway features that were documented as part of the town center planning.
Went through before.
It also included concepts of features that the council has weighed in on and developed as themes. If you recall, we developed Mequon River Station theme. There were 3 different themes that the council chose from in terms of streetscaping that included certain sets of materials, colors, species, etc. Those features have consistently been implemented both in the reconstruction of Cedarburg design and implemented in the public and semi-public realms of any private development that's occurred in the town center. So we're continuing that unified theme. We handed over all of those concepts as part of the RFQ, but the project management plan from Growth that is part of their RFQ submission, and please keep in mind that we in the committee were specific about asking for RFQs, requests for qualifications, not actual proposals. So we outlined the theme, the scope of the project, and through the project management plan, Growth Design would be not only working with the committee, but also returning to the Common Council at several different points in the process before selecting the final design. That also includes input from the Village of Thiensville, since they wish to financially contribute to the construction. What's also part of the project management plan is an opportunity to showcase preferred alternative designs and have the opportunity for public viewing and commentary on it before we would return to the council for a final selection of the design. Growth then would also take that final design, develop the construction drawings and documents that we can then prepare to bid. So through this design process, you're going to have full input on those features and the extent of the features and the cost estimates associated with those features. And by the time you look to or are asked to award the contract for construction, you will have gotten to the point of a preferred design.
Alderman Urban.
So this is using TIF funding. I recall years ago, before we started cash flowing positive in the TIF, we were making several interfund transfers to balance the budget from the capital improvement project to the TIF to pay the TIF debt before we were cash flow positive, and we did that for a number of years, and it ended up being somewhere totaling more than $1 million. I think it was 1.2, 1.4 in total over those years we had to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Have we started to pay that back yet, or is that at the end of the line behind the normal TIF debt?
Tom, are you still here? Oh.
Kind of a yes or no answer.
Yeah, the TIF has not started to repay that back to the city, but the numbers I provided to Alderman Garrell include that debt already. The TIF has started carrying its own water, so to speak. It's paying its own debt the last couple of years, but it's not at the point yet where it can start repaying the previous debt that's occurred. That will be coming on in the next couple of years.
Okay, I guess my question is centered around, should we be taking on more obligation? We've already taken money out of one pocket and put it in the other, and now we're can be committing more funds before we've even started paying ourselves back. I mean, I know this has been in the plan for a long time, and we have an opportunity to participate with Thiensville here. They've got $50,000 that runs out at the end of the year, but shouldn't we be paying ourselves back first before we take on additional projects?
Well, I'll defer to Kim on some aspects of this, but ultimately it's really a question of timing. Do we want to follow through with a feature that was part of the original project plan and has really been kind of promised to all the developers that already invested in the city center, or wait until everything's paid off and then turn to a gateway feature, which is, we're already into about what, year 10 now of TIF 3. So this is basically similar to the sewer debt borrowing we talked about, we're really just adding a little bit more time to the end of the project plan, but it's still going to cash flow positive. It's still going to close within the original scheduled time. It's just that we're proposing spending that monies now instead of waiting until the end of that
Correct.
time.
We've got the 60,000 now, and then
Correct.
more later, and it's variable depending on how successful the private-public partnership is, and I guess that's a bit of an unknown going into this. We expect the total bill to be somewhere between 350 and 500. Thiensville will participate at a level of 50,000. The 60,000 would come off our share, and then we have to gauge how successful the fundraising will be.
And then there's
to
the
cover the
fundraising
balance.
component. Correct.
We're projecting up to 150, but it could be more.
Yeah, I think that 350 to 500 is the gross amount before we take off all the subsidies and contributions.
Sure.
Yeah, and we'd be looking to be able to report on the committee's fundraising efforts prior to that contract to award for construction, so that, you know, we can be assured a certain
Yeah, I
contribution.
realize we're only committing the 60 today if it goes through.
Correct.
Yeah.
60 days for the design, and then you've got another opportunity of choice at the time of construction. You know, even the other funding source that we looked at was a park impact fees. I mean, through town center development alone, there's been, or there will be with the completion of the next two projects, over $400,000 contributed to that park impact fee. But again, we've got the opportunity, and I think what's leveraging this, raising this to a little bit more of a priority project is the willingness of a number of the representatives that came forward a year ago looking to help assist with the project.
Well, I mean, I don't really think we should look at this as, well, it's coming out of the TIF, because ultimately money spent through the TIF, if you don't spend money in the TIF, it goes back into the city treasury ultimately. So, you know, we're spending, or at least part of it does, part of it ends up going to other taxing authorities. But if this wasn't the private-public partnership that it will be, I wouldn't be supporting it. But I think like some of the other things we've done in Mequon, like the River Barn Park building and some other things where we provided some of the seed money and other people raised the bulk of the funds, that's a great opportunity for the city. You know, this isn't quite as much of a, 10 years ago I thought this was important for the town center. I'm a little less certain of that in this instance, since the town center is off and running without it. But I do think there's a lot of town center left over the next, even beyond the TIF, once the, even of redevelopment and creating that sense of place. We haven't done near what we originally planned to do. We will probably never do near of what we planned to do when the town center was originally created. But I think this is a good opportunity. And yes, the TIF is short of money. The city is not per se. We found other times where we could come up with 60 grand where we had a good use for it. But I want to, you said, well, it could be more than 150 grand. I'm not going to vote for more than 150 grand. I'm not sure I'm going to vote for 150 grand. I think that this needs to be largely privately funded. But I will vote for this tonight.
Alderman Gill.
I'll talk now so I don't stop everybody when it comes time for the vote. So to explain myself, I don't think the gateway feature is needed. I look at that over there. It's a want. It's somebody wants it. Somebody wants it. The residents don't want it. I'll tell you that. If you put this out for a referendum, I bet you'd fail by 80%. Somebody wants it. Some of the developers want it. Some of the stakeholders want it. It won't add to the tax base. I don't know how you're going to find out that that's going to contribute to our tax base, which is what the TIF's supposed to end up doing. we're behind with $1.7 million really when I took those two numbers and just added them together that Mr. Watson gave me. I believe 3 years ago, and almost to the day, where it was in February, that we voted to buy the Wells property for $1.5 million. I think the argument was we were somewhere in the red around $500,000 on it. We had to get this TID 3 out of the red. We're behind $500,000. Now it looks like, I may be wrong on this because the details on where your numbers came from, but looks like we're going backwards on it. So I don't see any reason to dig deeper for another $60,000 or another $150,000 after that. And the other thing is it should be funded by private funding, not city funding. I don't believe that, God bless her heart, she's out there looking for money, that you're going to find a lot of people who are going to contribute money to, they might have stakeholders or people from this group or that group, but where are you going to find a lot of private funding to come for this? So you make the commitment for now for the design for $60,000, and then 3-4 months later, wow, we couldn't get the funding. Now do we fund it or don't we? Who's going to take care of it? I don't think you're going to find the funding. I mean, you couldn't find the funding for Renneke Field. So anyway, I think it should be paid for by the Mequon Town Center businesses. They're the ones who are going to benefit from it if they're the ones who want it. I heard last time we had $208,000 set aside for this gateway feature, and I thought I heard Kim say that it was used for other developer incentives. That's what I thought I heard at the meeting. I'd have to go back and look at the YouTube video if you spent it. Don't come to the taxpayers for more. This is different than the sewer project. The sewer project is an absolute need. The $20 million for the sewer project is an absolute need. And when I put that thing up there 70 times in the last 30 years, we had sewage backed up in residents' basement. That's a long overdue need. I'll vote for that $20 million long before I'll vote for this $60,000. If you, like I said, if you put it out for a referendum, I think you'd find that overwhelmingly the residents wouldn't rubber stamp it and say, yes, city, this is a smart use of our money. So when it comes time to vote on this, you probably find me voting no.
Mr. Olchek.
I just like to reiterate that when the TIF was set up, I ran for office. I mean, even when the TIF was set up, the gateway feature was part of it. When I ran for office 5 years ago, I was across the street with Blair Williams. He was talking about a drainage thing, but we were also talking about gateway features. We had designs. This was 5 years ago. The TIF wasn't slated to go cash flow positive, spending money we didn't have then. Wouldn't have been a responsible thing to do as city leaders. The responsible time to do the promised gateway feature is when the TIF is slated to go cash flow positive, and it is now with the current development that's going on. So this will not impact the taxpayers. Funding will be there. I know for a fact Rotary has an interest in it. Women's Club has an interest. This is different than Renneke Field. Renneke Field is a single particular use, baseball use in the area. The town center feature is a feature in which the entire community sees. It's a feature in which the entire community would have the opportunity to use. Alderman Girl said the MTC businesses should pay for it. Well, they are. That's what the TIF funding is. Tax rate until that TIF is paid off, 100% of the tax rate goes to pay back the TIF, and when the TIF is paid off, then the taxes are allocated to not only the city but the other governing bodies, school and MATC, etc. I strongly disagree with letting private entities design it. If you're going to say that they should fund it, you should also give them the opportunity to design it. I think $60,000 to get an agreed on consensus with council, with two communities, is a worthy investment to come to an agreement on at least what the look should be at one point in time of our leadership. We've failed to do that up to this point. The TIF has been in place for multiple years. This is our opportunity to do it. As a council member, I'm fine watching the development grow, watching the buildings go up in our city. And when I ran for office, and the message that I've continually gotten and I'm seeing in campaign material is, preserve our rural character. I think as a governing body, we have flat out failed to reinvest in our community. We are letting the development define our community, define our look on our community. And then we have alligator arms and can't reach our pockets when it comes time to do something, some softscaping, to have a gateway feature, a park, some landscaping in place that will soften the development that comes. The residents have requested, because they want to use that space, they want to use the town center, they want to come and have a place to gather, a centrally located walkable area that you can get to from the bike path. It is a good thing, but we don't spend any money above the minimum on parks. Oh, somebody can raise money for that if they think it's important. Well, what about us? We don't think our parks are important. We don't think our rural character is important. We don't feel that a softer view on our community, a true gateway feature for Mequon and Thiensville is critical. We have the funding to do it. $60,000 gets us a design that's agreed on with two communities. We have the cash flow to do it. I don't see why we're hesitating on this. If we don't want $1 million plan, we don't agree to it. If we don't want a $500,000 plan, if we don't want a $150,000 plan, we don't agree to it. We can keep it minimalistic if we choose. That's our opportunity, and that's what this fund is here to do, that is allow a design firm to come in and, hey, council, what's your consensus on what you'd like to build? We have nothing to send to people to raise money for. Rotary paid for Riverwalk. They paid for Rotary Park. They've contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to our community, yet we can't spend a little bit of money to decide which gateway feature we want, and we have a group willing to raise funds for it, but we say it's not going to happen because we'd never gave them a shot.
Alderman Bushy.
I just want to follow up on actually one of my previous questions, and I think this is going to go back to our attorney. In the Wisconsin Department of Revenue, and this is, sorry if this is, if I'm not quite understanding how the process is working here, but it says at the end of the maximum life period concerning the TID, as soon as tax increments are collected in excess of total approved project costs, the TID must be terminated. And it goes on, but when we're discussing approved project costs, the question that I have is, are we seeking something in excess of what's been approved and therefore not part of the project? And so that would not be part of this. We would be outside of this statement here. I want to make sure that this is doing something that's not outside the legal requirements of the TIP.
Right. So the key there, I guess, is the approved project costs. Those project costs are defined, at least for the purposes of the TID, as those costs that are identified within the project plan that's adopted at the beginning. Within that project plan, the trick, however, is remember that those are just estimates in most cases. That some are going to be higher, some are going to be lower. You don't know what the end results will be. What that language in practice really means is that if you get to a point where you have done what you intended to do with your TID, in terms of your project costs and all of the assistance that you want to give as part of your development, and you are now running positive, such that you're just banking increment instead of using it to repay expenses that have been incurred, that at that point you need to terminate that TID and disperse the excess to the taxing districts and put that back on the tax rolls, because that is ultimately the goal of any TID, is to get those properties at that higher value back on the tax rolls. In this case, the monument was part of the project plan, was identified as something that we looked to do, and so adding the cost to do that, as long as we're not within those final 5 years, which we talked about at the committee, where you can't add new costs, that as long as you are doing that, you're okay. Now, if we didn't have this as one of those identified project costs, we wouldn't be able to do that unless we were going to amend the project plan itself. We'd have to go back to the Joint Review Board and get buy-in from all of the other communities and all of that kind of stuff. But we don't have to do that here because we've already done that. They bought into the concept of this is what we're generally proposing to do. Now, what's I think tripping you up is this idea that, well, we've already spent more than what we kind of anticipated our expenses were going to be. And in that case, we fall back on that your project plan is just an estimate. The statute talks about it being just an estimate. And what you need to do in circumstances where we are in that circumstance is to look at your projections and decide, is this something that fiscally is responsible that we should do or not? Meaning that if we've already spent $1 million more than we're ever going to repay, based on the available increment projections, and we're going to add another $1 million, and so the taxpayers at the end of the day are going to have to pay $2 million worth of value themselves, that's probably not something that we want to do. On the other hand, if based on all of the success of the TID, it projects that it's going to cash flow and you're looking okay, you're really okay in that respect from a legal perspective. Now, you may still not be comfortable with that, but from a legal perspective, you're okay. Because again, it falls back on what was the project plan, what did those other taxing jurisdictions buy into, and the fact that we talk about it being an estimate. So we'd recognize that those numbers are going to fluctuate and they may not be real. I mean, in most cases, a lot of TIDs, when you create them, you project that they're going to go out their full life. It's fairly rare to actually go into a TID where you project that it's going to end somewhere sooner than that full life. And so you go in saying that it's going to be the full life, and you may be 18 years, incurring project costs 18 years from when you first started. Your costs are going to be far different than what you anticipated them to be at the start of that TID 18 years earlier, and that's just a function of inflation and everything else. So, as I say, legally, to add this as a TID expenditure, you're okay. Fiscally, or just based on your comfort, that's policy. That's your decision.
So, actually, fundamentally, why is this before us if it was part of the project?
Because we're asking to award a contract for design services, and the contract award requires Common Council.
Right. As would all TID expenditures. When we, for example, any TID that we would do a developer's incentive, we're going to pay money directly. That would be something, even though it's part of the project plan, hey, we know we're going to do this, still comes back because we need to ultimately approve that. Because, remember, we may get ourselves in that circumstance where our estimates were so far off that we're never going to cash flow, in which case, why are you going to approve more project costs at that point? So we always bring things back for approval and the sign-off to say, yes, we're moving forward and this is an appropriate expenditure of those TID funds based on the project plan and based on our financial projections. We're always going to do that. So.
Alderman Hawkins.
I'm going to speak out to just take a minute to support this expenditure. I go back long enough to remember when we didn't have anything here. We had the mobile station, which was a mobile station. And not only did the Mequon-Thiensville, the Mequon-Thiensville Rotary Club support our project, but so did the Thiensville-Mequon Rotary Club support this project. And so the question is, okay, you're spending this money and this is in support of Thiensville. Well, a little bit, yeah, because Mequon shares a lot with Thiensville. We share the library, for example. That's a joint venture. But the school district, thank you. Who whispered that? Thank you. The school district, these are big, important things that we share with Thiensville. And you could say, well, this gateway is just pointing a lot of people to Thiensville. That's okay. I'm okay with that, because for Mequon to be successful, I think Thiensville has to be successful. So if you want to argue that this is just going to be supporting Thiensville, I'm okay with that. But I would argue that if Thiensville's successful, Mequon's successful, this is, yes, it's going to be highlighting our town center, which is a good thing for us, but it's also going to highlight Thiensville's businesses, and I think that's why we ought to support it.
Third time you're speaking, go ahead.
Is it? Well, you let me. I was simply going to say that, we talk about the town center being a long-term thing. It's not. If we want to have something other than a series of individual developments, then you have to create the infrastructure around it to create the neighborhood concept. And that neighborhood concept is supposed to include Thiensville, as John just pointed out. But I also think this helps the long term, well beyond the TIF, or the TID. Ultimately, hopefully, the Piggly Wiggly Center redevelops at some point. Hopefully, eventually, some of the other properties, the vacuum cleaner store building and other places. If you don't create that unifying, it works together, and we haven't done a good job of that. I think we're going to fall short on the ultimate development that outside of TIF dollars that we otherwise could and should. And this is just one little piece of it, in part to fulfill part of what was a bigger vision for the area that you saw in the plan. And plans change over time, and we probably won't do everything that was in it, but to do some of that, I don't think we've done a great job on streetscaping yet. I don't think we've done a great job on lights. I don't think we've done a great job on a bunch of things to tie the area together, and we didn't do quite the job we originally talked about doing in tying Thiensville together with Mequon for this area. Maybe this is a little bit of start of that, but yeah, it is incremental. You asked that question earlier. This is one step in a longer-term process, part of which may be with TIF money, part of which may occur after the TIF is long closed, or may occur through private development.
And if we expect people to contribute, the private sector to contribute, then we have to be credible. And we accepted a donation from the Junior Women's Club of a changeable message sign. I don't know, it was $40,000 or something, and
60.
We indicated that we would soon be cleaning up that corner and putting in the gateway feature, and that's why they donated that sign to us. So we need to be credible. Call the roll.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
He's shaking yes.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Oh,
Alderman
aye,
Meyer.
sorry.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
No.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
7-1, and that resolution is adopted. Resolution 3496, approving an agreement with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation for a site assessment grant in the amount of $150,000 related to site investigation, demolition, and the removal of abandoned containers at the former city-owned property located at 6200 West Mequon Road. This was recommended by the Finance Personnel Committee this evening.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Stralchuk.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nervin.
Aye.
8-0, and that's approved. Resolution 3497, approving a City of Mequon Emerald Ash Borer policy recommended by the Tree Board in January and recommendation forthcoming from Public Works.
Public Works approved the resolution.
Do you have a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Any discussion? Alderman Worth.
I have a question. In a few different places in this policy, it says, for example, in paragraph C, it says, it's the intent of the City of Mequon to remove all ash trees along city-owned property. What does the word along mean? Or is it in or on?
Neither of us are attorneys. We're happy to change the word if there's a more appropriate one. We're just trying to indicate that, for example, along a roadway, adjacent to a roadway,
But
for
it's-
the length of a roadway.
But it's in the city-owned right-of-way,
Yes.
correct? That's
Correct.
what I want to just clarify.
Yes.
That this isn't, hey, there's 5 ash trees nearby, and it kind of says so in other places, but along city-owned property makes it sound like as long as you can reach it, you'll whack it down,
No.
and that.
We have enough ash trees to be responsible for. We don't need to be responsible for anyone else's.
I don't like the fact that we're not going to replace trees in places that we're taking them down off of, in front of private residences, but I'll probably vote for it.
We will if they want us to.
At their cost. We told them to
At
put the
their
tree up.
supplement, it does not cover the cost, but at their supplement for the tree replacement program, yes.
Alderman Schneider.
I just have a small correction and then a question that I need to have clarified. On, let's see, packet page 254, in paragraph 3A, I think you mean to say affected parties, not effected, affected
Yes.
with an A.
Okay.
But my question is, I don't see that there's any emphasis here on focusing or prioritizing trees that are dead. And I recognize that your overall goal is to get us rid of all ash trees because the presumption is that even the ones that look healthy at present are infected. But from a public safety standpoint, it seems to me that the priority should be more on trees that are in fact dead or dying because from what you've told us previously, those trees are brittle and they can fall unexpectedly. So I'm just wondering why there is no, at least that I can see here, priority to dead trees.
In the prioritization number 1, the removal of hazard trees, I would suggest that all trees that are dead would be considered hazardous. So
That isn't the way it reads to the public, I don't think, or to me anyway.
Sure.
Immediate potential threat to personal safety. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman
And,
Strelchak.
You want to add an amendment?
I think when we discussed this on tree board, because I'm on tree board, the focus was going to be on the dead or immediately dying trees as the first and main focus. However, if there were some efficiencies for living trees that were in that same area, I don't know that he wanted to narrow it down to having to go pick out a dead tree on site A and then a half mile away go for another dead tree on site B. He wanted to use the best available resources of the city funds and clean up an area at a time while focusing on the hazard trees, which are the dead trees. The dead trees they're listed first in the list, if I remember correctly from reading this and going through this. Just by that first listing and the discussion in committee and this discussion, I'm very comfortable voting on it as is. If you want to edit it slightly to indicate that we're going to focus on it, but what I don't want to do is pigeonhole him into only doing dead trees. If they're dead or dying, they need to go. Emerald ash borer is spreading at a rapid pace. If a tree's not dead, 1 year you might get another year out of it, but it's going to go soon, and I'd rather have them work efficiently to remove the trees that are going to go and get that canopy growth going with other healthy trees sooner than later.
So in this document, hazard trees primarily is focusing on dead trees.
Hazard trees.
Is that accurate?
Yeah,
would be
Or
highlighted
dying
as-
trees.
dead or
that would-
dying trees that presented, a structural issue, either from the disease, from EAB or elsewise. I mean, hazard trees, I would categorize as something that was dead or dying. I mean, if a tree was alive and perfectly healthy,
It wouldn't be
the
a hazard
condition
tree.
rating wouldn't be such that I would categorize it as a hazard then.
Okay. No, I guess I didn't, I understand the clarification now. That all of the hazard trees are basically dead trees.
Yeah,
That's our top
and just for
priority.
clarification, even without the EAB policy, in just the normal tree preservation policy, we cover dead and dying trees. So this just, we listed it as a hazard tree in the EAB policy because they're going to be subsequently dying, where they're all the way dead before we can even get them on the ground. So that's where the hazard tree kind of reference came.
Alderman Garrell.
At Public Works, I asked you, how can you tell, how did they die? And I thought your answer was really really good answer, and I learned a lot from it.
Sure.
Can you spend just a minute or two telling the rest of the council? Maybe they already know, but I thought it was a really good explanation.
So I think you're referencing when I told you about the mid canopy height, and that's how so most of where they figure that emerald ash borer affects trees initially is the mid canopy height, which would be to the 15 to 25 foot high range, which isn't easily noticed by anyone really. I mean, other than an arborist climbing the tree. And that's where you'll first see the structural damage start to happen, where you won't see the tip dieback initially because you're going to see the nutrient capabilities where it's passing from the root system up into the the tips of the trees get adjusted, where you're going to have shrinking of the leaves first, and then an overall discoloration of the trees with slight canopy loss, where it goes from 90% to 80%, 70%, and so on. So that's where people aren't necessarily noticing. That's what's so bad about emerald ash borer is they don't necessarily notice the trees dying or diseased until you're seeing tip dieback, and at that point it's beyond the 80% mark, which is where treatment can be involved. And once you're below that 80% mark, the treatment is ineffective. So the tree is essentially past the point of treatment.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? That resolution is adopted. Resolution 3498, amending Resolution 3478 to increase compensation for the negotiation and execution of easement agreements within the East Trunk Sewer Project area based on professionally certified appraisals. This was recommended by the Sewer Utility District this evening.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Bushy?
Aye.
Alderman Meyer?
Aye.
Alderman Worth?
Aye.
Alderman Garrell?
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins? Alderman Schneider?
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin?
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk?
Aye.
To 8-0, and that is adopted. Resolution 3499, authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement with the Village of Thiensville for public sanitary sewer service at 12431 North Green Bay Road and an adjacent 7.5-acre parcel located immediately to the west. This was recommended by the Sewer Utility District Commission this evening.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a
Third.
second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrell. Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
8-0. and that's
Alderman
adopted.
Strelchek.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
It's already been decided, but aye.
The mayor already called it unanimous.
Can we just stop at 5?
Predict the future. Resolution 3500, authorizing publication of notice of intent to issue general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $20,340,000 in connection with the East Trunk Sewer Capacity Expansion Project.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Call the roll.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman
Sure,
Garrell.
that's it.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchek.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy. Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Move things along.
It only takes 10 seconds. No specified unfinished business, no petitions, memorials, remonstrances, or communications. Under specified miscellaneous new business, we have an appointment to the Festivals Committee.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That is approved.
Aye.
We have a closed session, convene into closed session pursuant to section 19.85, paren 1, paren G, Wisconsin state statutes conferring with legal counsel for the government body who is rendering oral and written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved. Village Park litigation update. And convene into closed session. No, we have to vote on that.
Move to go into closed session.
Second.
Motion and a second. Call the roll.
Alderman Garrell.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchek.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Checking. I don't think I have a conflict anymore. Can we wait 1 second?
You can still vote on it, go in closed session.
You can still.
You can?
But aye. Okay, aye.
8-0. Also convene into closed session pursuant to section 19.85, paren 1, paren C, Wisconsin state statutes, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. This involves personnel, the evaluation of the city administrator.
Move approval. Or move to go into closed session, excuse me.
Yes, we have to do them separately.
Second.
Second. Motion and second. Call the roll.
Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchek.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrell.
Aye.
8-0, and we're going into closed session, and we will not return.